here. It is a hot cup of coffee. It is a stack of comic books. And we have Paulo Costa showing up just in time, it looks like. Is he going to make it through? Hello, Paulo. Can you hear me?
Hi, Tim. Can you hear
Awesome.
me?
I can
Awesome.
hear you. I like how you
Right.
make right on the slip. It was like 5 seconds from 10:41. So,
Yeah, I'm in my parents' house. I had tuna for lunch.
cool, fantastic. So let me finish introductions here. What I was talking about. Get out of here. But basically, it's the Rainy Sunday show. It is raining over here. Do you have daylight savings time over in Portugal, sir?
Yeah, but it starts at the end of the month.
Thank God for you, because this is horrible. There was going to be no show this morning until I woke up and saw that I lost an hour of my life. I feel like I'm in the Princess Bride. They got me. And I'm like, the day is shot. The day is shot. So you've been doing
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, it's election day over here.
Oh,
We're
on
choosing
a
our next prime
Sunday.
minister. Yes,
On a
elections are
Sunday,
on the
yeah.
Sunday. Right, because nobody works on a Sunday.
That makes
The
so much
reason why
sense.
the reason why you don't have elections on a Sunday is because uh, you have church in the morning.
Mhm.
That was and it may, depending on where you were, it may take you one day to get to your polling place. Now,
Gotcha.
that doesn't make any sense anymore, because even when I worked Sundays, I could go and vote, because if you work Sundays, your employer is mandated by law to give you time to go vote. But I would go vote, and then I would go to work. Doesn't really matter, because
Nice.
everyone is at lunchtime. But
Awesome.
apart from that, yeah. So I voted.
Well played, sir. Well played. And also like how you informed me of my country. You know what I mean? I was like, I got
Hmm. No, voting's the way that
it makes
governments
so much more sense
are
to do it
made.
on a
It's not
Sunday.
the same. Yeah,
Got
but it's not the same everywhere else. Like, okay, so we're choosing the next prime minister, but we don't vote for the prime minister. We vote for our version of Congress.
hmm
We choose the parties. We don't have first past the post. It's distributive. So in my district, which encompasses 18 different mayors, uh, we will probably choose from 5 parties, because we get to choose about, I think, 19 members of parliament,
Okay.
and we vote for 5. We usually choose about five of those parties when we distribute. We use the Jefferson method, and then the president, who is head of state but not head of the government. In the United States, the president is the head of government.
hmm
The president here needs to uphold political stability. So
Okay.
he will choose he can choose whichever person he wants for prime minister, but he will usually choose whoever's from the winning party, the person that was appointed to become prime minister, and, and so that's what we'll do. What he'll do. But the thing is, we have a third party spoiler who is going to change everything on this election, and
You're very
and
excited. Yeah, I
we're
mean, this is awesome.
expecting no, we're expecting political instability over the next few months.
hmm
so yeah, it's something that we don't like, because we like political stability. It comes from the fact that we used to love living in an absolutist monarchy, which ended in 1820, but we still like living in it. But
So it's
apart from
so it's a nervous excitement. I mean, you ought to see you're beaming, but you chuckled and you'll say political instability. So I'm kind of like, oh, So yeah.
listen, I'm the only guy in this country who would wear a shirt saying taxation is theft. Nobody else in the country would. So,
Okay.
so it's kind of fun for me, the idea that we're going to have political instability.
That is awesome. I'm expecting updates now. I'm like over the next course of the course of the next few months. I want updates. I'm getting what happened is you made the gears start turning. Now I'm sort of like thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead of what's going to
Mhm,
happen. That it's popping. Oh, that's awesome. Oh
mhm.
my god.
Yeah. Although you should consider getting rid of first past the post, because then the crazies would not go to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. They would have their own parties, and crazy people would be free to vote for the crazy party. But you would get rid uh, of the Christian fundies on the Republican Party, and you'd get rid uh, of the communist infiltrators on the Democratic Party. They would have their own parties, so it would actually function better.
Right on. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome, man. Oh man. I'm kind of wondering. Are you going to be able to talk about comics, or are you like still juiced from the voting and stuff? You're going to be okay? I
Oh
mean,
no, no, we can talk
I,
about comics. We can talk about comics.
no, man,
But
no, it's
since
not
I'm at
that.
my
I'm just
parents'
sort of.
house,
Uh-huh.
I don't have
No.
comics here.
Okay. And what's great about you showing up on a Sunday, and I know you sent me a message saying you were available from certain time to certain time, but let everybody know
Mhm.
like how lunch happens in Portugal because I think it's like I'm jealous. Like I'm like I would be there. You make it an all day event, don't you?
Kind of, it's even if it's just you have if it's just having lunch with the wife and kids, it's Sunday.
Yeah, yeah,
You're not going to do anything.
right.
You can take time. Lunch isn't done by by 1 p.m. You haven't even started eating at 1 p.m. Doesn't matter. You can take time. Uh,
Nice.
Alternatively, you can get lunch done as quickly as possible because you're going to go to the soccer match. But you have all day, and if for any reason you set up something with friends or family, it's the whole day. You get done
Yeah,
by lunch at 3:30, but you stay, you talk, you drink. Then by 6 o'clock, somebody will remember that dinner time is coming up, and it's, oh, we still have to get home. Oh, it doesn't matter. You still have some soup, you still have some leftovers, and you're still there. You want to get home at 6, but by the end of then it's 9 p.m., and that's when you go home.
yeah. It's still a lot like that over here in the States, or the expectation stuff. But it's kind of like you guys turn it up to 11. You know what I mean? Like it seems it seems. I know how that sounds to you, like it's not a big deal, but it usually be like some people it's church, go to lunch, fight a crowd, then maybe go home, people talking. And it didn't used to be like that busy. That still takes up most of a day before you know it. So that's why I was like, I like what y'all do. So that's
Mm.
fantastic, man.
Yeah, but
Oh my God.
if Gore came up, he would tell you it's the same thing with his family because it's a Southern European thing, and
Nice.
Mexico being having been part of the Spanish Empire, they inherited that part of Spanish culture. So
Nice.
so we being it's us, it's the so it's Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Italians. We have time, we have the sun, we have the food, and we get together with family. So Sunday, it's the day to when you spend time with the family.
I tell you what I like, and then I think it's hilarious. It's kind of random out of left field, but like if I'm at work and for some reason Portugal comes up, or if I'm watching a TV show with somebody, usually my wife or something, or we're watching a movie with friends or something, and we're out and Portugal comes up, I get to like smugly turn around, look at everybody like, yeah, I know a guy in Portugal. I know what really goes on over there. Let me tell you about Sundays. So. Oh, we got some comments already. Let's see who we got. We got Rob Ripa. Now, Rob and I go way back, man. Everybody check out his channel if it's still up. Original music is what he used to put on there. Fantastic guy. Big Texas boy there. Lord Tapman's comics.
Cool.
I don't know if he's been here before. I'm sorry if I don't
Yes.
remember. And a man that I almost invited to this, I threw out 3 or 4. I invited Breen. I threw out a Gore. I just kind of threw it out because some of the stuff I'm talking about, I want some feedback, because I'm in a mood from this daylight savings time. And believe it or not, I almost sent one to Woodward, but it's been so long since I talked to him, I thought it might have been weird. So Woodward, if you want an invite, just let me know there.
Well,
Uh,
Carson's restarted this channel a bit,
yeah,
haven't you? Yeah. So It's good, and I think sometimes instead of everybody just doing, there was a time when everybody was kind of doing the same thing, which was okay. So I bought this comic, and I bought this comic, and I bought this comic. Okay, now let's stop showing the comics. Let's start talking about the comics. And sometimes you have to talk to the comics about the comics with somebody else. Let's get people in and let's talk about the comics. Okay, do you know this? And even if it's a comic that the other person doesn't know. Okay, so do you know this comic? Oh no, I haven't seen that before. Oh well, this comic is about so and so, and it's done by so and so, and the reason I like this is because of this, and it's a good way, especially at this time. You've noticed that Grotto Orloff is very upset with the notion of slabs and hiding the comics behind a wall of glass. Yeah, and everybody who likes American comics kind of is a bit guilty of that. We all went with the collectionist part of the collecting part of the business. And so okay, so we accumulate stuff and we save it. Oh, that's my dad over there.
Everybody say hello. How are you?
Olá, quem é?
This is my dad. This is my José. Isto é o Tim. Ele está na Virgínia, nos Estados Unidos.
Virgínia, o mais próximo em Philadelphia, in Chip.
Yeah, my dad used to be in the petrol tankers, and the closest he got to you where you're at, his ship.
Marcos Zuc, Philadelphia, BP.
I'm about 6 hours. 6 hours for Philadelphia. Nice. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. My dad doesn't believe that comic people are normal.
That's cool. I like the idea that I've been closer physically to your dad than I've physically been to you. That's kind of wild, you know. So.
Yeah, but he did that a lot. There was a time when the company that he worked for, they took oil to America, and he's told me about the times he was in Philadelphia, but also in New Orleans. Not actually New Orleans. You went up the river. Went up the Mississippi in Louisiana, and there's a specific place there where you would discharge the oil. And Louisiana is a lot more fun than Philadelphia.
Mississippi, St. James, Baton Rouge, und Sud, the Mississippi, one zone. I think is the liver ships, very big ships.
Yeah. My bucket list.
Plenty times in Sud, plenty times.
Yeah, my last bucket list thing is to get on one of those ships and go down the entire Mississippi. Like, once I do that, I'm like, that's it. I'm over with. So Baton Rouge, come out there and everything, awesome.
Eles querem nos barcos que eles têm no Mississippi, mas vai para baixo, porque ele está no centro.
So, sim. Okay. Virginia mais acima, sim. Okay. Bye.
These are the little things that keep me doing YouTube. You know, like little things like this. I mean, you just don't think you're going to wake up and be spoken to somebody in their native language over in Portugal, and they've seen more of America than the person that lives there. You know?
Yeah. Well, you noticed my dad is not his English is not very good, but when he was in his business, he speaks to people who also don't speak English very well. Yeah. So they get along much better. Than somebody who's a native speaker speaking to somebody else.
Oh, I love it. I dig it. I love it. So.
Tim, sim.
Diz que os nossos vizinhos aqui também são americanos e ele chama-se Tim.
Okay. So the apartment next door is rented to American pensioners. It's been that way for a couple of years. So it's pensioners who retire, and then they want to meet other places. So the place has always been switching pensioners couples, and the current one is also named Tim.
Oh, awesome. No relation, but I wish, I'd come on over. I'm getting my first passport. We're taking a trip in November. Finally
that's
going out.
the
Yeah.
that's the kind of thing that only an American say. Oh, I'm in my 50s and I'm getting my first passport.
Well, what I'm finding out.
Okay, my dad wants to show you what he's drinking. It's a brandy. It's a brandy. It's made in the same caskets as port wine, but it's a brandy.
Oh, nice.
I also had it for lunch.
Oh, that's fantastic.
What are you drinking in your coffee mug?
Wildberry. It's coffee.
It's só café.
Yeah, it's a Starbucks espresso. A Starbucks espresso. Yeah. We got the little cup.
Yeah.
There's no way to top that. If you sit there with a nice little brandy glass,
Yeah. Well, it's the thing that I've actually mentioned as on a stream with Jared. You Americans have a very weird relationship with alcohol because it's almost like it's personal, and with us, alcohol is communal. So when we're drinking with somebody else. So the notion that we don't become alcoholics. There's a notion here that people how they describe our alcohol consumption to foreigners. Oh, we don't have alcoholics in Portugal. We have lots of drunks, but no alcoholics.
Well, here's the well, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna do like 60 seconds, maybe, of like trying to get this across. What I've noticed is we have people who will bring over foreign exchange students, and they'll experience Halloween for the first time, and they're like 17 to like I've seen them up to 25 somehow. I don't know how that works, right? So I've actually been able to sit down for real and talk to them, and I found out one of the stigmas is that they think Americans don't travel. We're not traveled well. We don't go out of the country a lot. Then they get here and they realize that people have a 45 to an hour commute in some places to work. And where they're from, they can go to 2 other countries from there in 45 minutes. Like they always bring up there. Yeah. Okay. So then all of a sudden they realize we don't have to travel, and they see how big it is here once they experience it. And then they realize that America, you can't paint with a broad brush. Northern people are different than Southern people. People on the other side of the Mississippi are different than the East. And then even then, it's a bunch of tiny, smaller countries actually. And then what really opened my eyes is when they couldn't believe that they went to Virginia, Tennessee, a little bit of West Virginia. I'm like, never been here before. Then when they go to 5 states, 6 states, and they can't believe that each time they do it, it's like a short drive.
It's my mom here. See.
Oh yeah.
Não fere os olhos, aqui.
And then they realize that like not only what they opened my eyes to is that they're each state has its own culture, but even each state is a little bit divided, if that makes sense. So they're amazed with the patriotism they do see because, if they watch the news and everything, they think everybody hates America, even here. And there's a difference between hating America and hating the government. There's 2 different things. They don't like what the government is doing to America. And for some reason, that's where they couldn't express themselves really well. That seemed to be a thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, and we weren't having real deep conversations,
Yeah, we don't really think about your states that much. We do have, in general, we have an understanding of regional groupings that happen in the United States.
Wait a minute. Breen has brought his shit stick, his shit stir stick. Oh man, I need more coffee. Give that Ferner what for, Howler.
See, here's the thing: the geographic difference between where Breen was born and Breen currently lives means that in Europe you're 3 countries away.
Yeah.
So what we understand is that Americans are all the same, except they're not.
Right.
But they are the same where it counts, and they are different where it counts.
Where I live, we got Gore here. So where I live is a unique part of. Good morning, Gore. How are you?
Hey, Gore.
Oh, good morning. I didn't know it was going to be so sudden.
Oh no, it's all right.
Good morning,
my thing is
what
like
up,
we're going to get the comics here in a minute, but now we're talking about international perceptions of countries, of America specifically.
What did I just jump into?
Oh, nothing. But I'm going to finish this sentence and then we'll get on here and stuff. I'm so glad you joined us, Gore. We'll little comic cop. Hopefully, I saw little Jack Kirby and stuff in the title and everything. So
Yeah, I just saw Kirby, and I didn't know Paulo was here already.
Yeah.
First, Paulo, it's good to meet you finally. After all,
Finally.
this
Oh,
Yeah.
I had no idea you guys had not. Okay, great.
No,
Yeah.
seriously, you can go years and years without actually talking to somebody face to face. Like in 2022, I did either a Christmas or a New Year's broadcast, and I did 2 6-hour broadcasts in the same day. Took time to lunch, and Sleepy Reader finally came in, and we finally talked. Because we've been on each other's live streams all the time, but on comedy, but we never get to talk to each other. Sometimes it's because of the hour difference. I am 5 hours away from you. I am 6 hours away from Gore. I am 8 hours away from Damien. It's very different because just getting all the scheduling together, it's mathematics.
And unfortunately, I'm stuck back in the era where like we all talk to each other. It's like it amazes me when I find out people who are familiar with each other, and I've seen them comment to each other through comments or whatever. It still kind of blows my mind.
Excuse me.
But finishing up what I said about my part of America, and then we can get on to Jack Kirby or something if you want, or wherever you guys want to go. But where I live, you can draw a circle: southwestern Virginia through the south part of West Virginia, a little bit of Kentucky, some Tennessee, a little North Carolina, right about to Asheville. This is a whole other little country of its own within it. I have to explain to people we're not Southern, we're Appalachia. And then even when you come here, we're it blows their mind how self-reliant we are. But it also blows my mind how they're not in other places. I'm like, why don't you just fix that? Things like that. It's small little details that you have to experience instead of sitting here me point every little thing out. You know what I mean? And then if you go up north just a little bit or even south, it's still an Appalachian mountains, but they're so different. I loved Alabama, how they are. It's a warmer climate down there, but it's still Appalachia, and they move a little bit faster with their dating scenes and stuff. You go up north a little bit and stuff, you get up there and it gets a little wild. That's where you get into some of those stories about the feuds and the families and things like that. People hear stories about West Virginia. In my experience, it's really Kentucky. West Virginia gets a bad rap because they're poor in places. You know what I mean? In Kentucky, that's where all the weird stuff's going on, so.
Yeah. In Europe, you get that in Germany and France.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Well, starting with Virginia, I mean, because of the Civil War, you had West Virginia because the West supported the Union and not secession. And I come from a schizophrenic state known as Texas, and which doesn't know what it wants. It was part of the Spanish Empire and the Mexican Empire, and then it became briefly its own country, a republic, right? That's why at our schools you have two pledges of allegiance. First, you do a pledge of allegiance to the American flag, which is on one side of the room, and on the other side of the room, it's a Texas flag. So it becomes its own republic, and then it joins the Union. And then a few years later, it secedes from the Union. And then when Lincoln becomes president, it forces it back into the Union. So yes, this is our history. We're quite a mess here, and that's what we are, right?
Well, I love Texas. Even I'm not going to go into my little story. I had a flight when I was in the military, stay there. We had a little bit of a layover. But when I was 20, I lived with a girl from Texas for 9 months who moved up here. And I don't know if this is going to be a good metaphor if you haven't seen the movie, but there's a movie with John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd called Neighbors.
Yeah.
And I was John Belushi, the real kind of calm guy, a little bit wild and stuff. And she was Dan Aykroyd moving in next door. And it was wild. You know what I mean? Like it's like that wild neighbor where like it's great to see him and you're ready for a night, but good God, let me go back to bed for a day or two before you come back over. Let me recover. So yeah, I love Texas. I mean, or at least Texans. So
Yeah, we're in an unusual state, and I mean, in the sense that, I mean, one of the things that does frustrate me is that, I mean, McConaughey's from here, Matthew McConaughey,
Yeah.
and I did notice with Matthew, because he now lives in Austin. He lived in California, but he moved here back to Texas about almost 10 years ago, and I think his wife is from Brazil. And one thing about Matthew is that, you know, or McConaughey, is that whenever he would appear on the talk shows, because I used to watch all the talk shows, I remember his Texas accent. He's originally from Uvalde, then he moved to Longview, and he would always really accentuate the West Texas or just the Texas accent, whatever that may be, right?
Right.
But one day I saw him at the Cannes Film Festival. He was being interviewed there about a movie. And I noticed that his accent was not as prominent. Now I'm thinking, either this is your natural accent, or what are you doing when you go on these shows? You know, he does something that Robert Rodriguez does. Rodriguez is also from Texas. He's from the San Antonio area. Shows up with his cowboy hat, his cowboy boots, and he does, like I'm talking now, kind of emphasizing this myth, because we're partly guilty for perpetuating this myth about Texas, stereotypes about Texas. We're quite guilty of that. And that's one thing I said, Matthew, wait a minute. When you're on one of the talk shows, the night talk shows, your Texas accent really just jumps out. But now you're here on the at Cannes. Suddenly your English is, not so accentuated. It's, so that I was frustrated about Matthew. Anyway, I don't know how I got off on that. Me and Matt McConaughey are history. He now lives in the Austin area. He's got a huge mansion there in Austin, Texas. But again, Austin gave birth to him because of Dazed and Confused, and he was a film student at the University of Texas a few years later when Richard Linklater did the film Slacker. And Linklater has a lot to do with this because, and Wes Anderson was even nearby. Wes Anderson was from Houston. Anyway, it's a whole other story. But in any event, I don't know what the point of this rambling about this was. But otherwise, Paulo, it's finally good to see you. Finally good to meet you after all these years in the chats. And Tim, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was off the fly because I don't know if you saw the beginning, but it's daylight savings time. So we have no room for any kind of stuttering, any kind of mind blanks we run into or anything. I love it, man. I feel like we're watching a CBS sitcom with Paolo's family. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Everybody
I'm in
lives
my I'm in my parents' house. The house where I grew up, and my parents are over here, like they're 5 feet away from me.
Well, that's wonderful, Paulo. Greetings to them from Texas.
Yeah. So, are we familiar with Jack Kirby by any chance? Have you guys heard of this dude?
I used to have those magazines. I have that issue somewhere. I have that.
Okay. Well, I don't know what the deal is, but this just came out for me. This is number 89, and I was reading it last night. And Paulo, I'm going to bounce off what you said right before Gore got here and stuff about. C. Woodward is here in the comments. I think he's got some stuff to do, and you're talking about how he came back and everything. And I can't watch another Hall video just because I've been here for 14 years watching them. And there's a lot of things where people aren't really reading the comics or talking about them, or it's turning into slabs, drama farming, all the things that are part of collecting, but not the main thing. So all of a sudden, I'm reading a reprint of the second part of an interview from Jack Kirby in 1984 in this. And I found it so relevant to what's going on now. Like I'm the guy that you need to give with the current way comics are. Reading this article was just amazing because they weren't alluding to anything. They were in 1984. Kirby was in the middle of doing 100 Hunger Dogs. They were talking about his superpowers, and the guy was going back asking him about what was it like going to DC. Why did you go to DC? And he kept it very businesslike. He's like, they want to put me on some main books. I'm like, those books don't need to be fixed. I want to create something new. He was talking about his fourth world. Then they moved on to talking about his Eternals. Again, he was wanting to do something new. And you could tell how well thought out he was talking about his books. They were like, you had a Hulk robot instead of the Hulk and Eternals. He's like, well, I wanted to keep the Eternals as the centerpiece for the book. You put the Hulk in there. He's the centerpiece. He's the star. And then he, talking about leaving comics, and he went into business doing animation and things like that. And then they were like, "What about Pacific Comics?" And he was like, "They gave me the deal I wanted. They left me alone. I gave them the books. I don't even know what they're doing now." And then they were like, "How did you come back to DC?" And he was like, "Because it was all business. It was a good deal." So they finally and they said, what is the business? And he's like, "I'm hired to sell books and give you new ideas. DC needed some new characters, so I gave them Orion and Darkseid. I did a good job." And he went on. He was keeping it business, tooting his own horn, but he was absolutely right about what he did. And the business is that he's there to help sell books. And then he wanted to be alone to do the artistic expression. So with that mouthful I just said, without going deep down into this and stuff, but basically what it is that he remembers that the job is to sell comics and to do the best job you can and to artistically tell a story. He talked about 2001 in here with his Star Child, and he got into this big philosophical thing, how it went from the Star Child to why he went to Machine Man. And he said Arthur C. Clarke did some good stuff. Don't get me wrong. He's talking like they're contemporaries. And that's where I was like,
But they are.
Yeah.
They are. Yeah, it's true.
That's what I'm getting at.
Generation. Absolutely.
So that's where I want to stop there, because I'm reading this and it's like it's like I've traveled to another dimension with somebody that has a balance of remembering comics are a business. We are to engage the readers, excite them, and keep things moving forward. Because that's the thing. He never wanted to look back. Whatever they did with the Eternals by 1984, he didn't keep up with. He said it's somebody else's thing. And then he's exploring how these stories work. Every character he ever wrote, he had a life in their head before he put the pencil down. You know what I mean? Just the way he thought. And I'm kind of wondering, it's like with the Marvel movies. This is where my head goes, and we'll go wherever you guys want to go with this. But the Marvel movies seem to go downhill with Eternals because, in my mind, they took out the Kirby, a complete Kirby creation. They took out the Kirby spark. Those movies started with the Kirby spark. Go look at the first Thor movie. Look at the Marvel comics of the last 10 years. They've took out the Kirby, is what I feel, in the Ditko and the original stuff. So am I just grasping at straws, or do you guys hear some validity on this? This is why I send out invitations. Maybe I need to be reined in. Maybe I got excited reading about an old Kirby. I love these old articles and stuff like that. They pump me up.
Paulo?
Well, there are two major Kirby fans in Portugal. One of them is my LCS's owner. The other one is me. And Kirby had an interesting understanding of how the business worked, having been born having grown up during the Great Depression. So he knew that whatever he wanted to do, he needed to make money on it. And so, but he was very aware of how creative it was.
Yeah.
And he was capable of putting the art in service of commercial considerations. It's not something that's easy to do. A lot of people know I had this amazing idea, but nobody cares. I don't care what I'm doing as long as I get paid. Those two are the easy paths, and it's what most people do.
Yeah.
So in that regard, Kirby could walk both sides of the road. He just was his problem being that he wasn't actually very business savvy. He never got to be. He always had somebody else to handle it, or he got taken advantage of.
Yeah.
I think he knew what he thought he was doing with starting with the Fourth World and going through his Marvel period and getting out. It's just that you get to an age where you really start not being as aware of where the market is, because you're used to thinking a certain way, and the older you get, the more frozen your thought patterns become. He was still very creative. He just couldn't turn that creativity into something that was commercially necessary. By the time we got to the Marvel stuff, it's very interesting, but it's very conceptual, and it doesn't reach the minds of the people who are more likely to be impressed by something. There's that little bit of a difference between having an idea and being able to communicate it properly to those who are most receptive to a new message.
Mm-hmm.
I think regarding Kirby, I think both of you are much better versed on Kirby's history than I am. And however, my impression of him is that foremost he was, in the true sense, an artist, but he was from a generation that the Great Depression era generation, right, and also American immigrant experience. And he's working for, like Paulo said, for a commercial business. You're about selling books. You don't sell books, you're not gonna work. And yet he was still in his heart an artist, and he wanted to project all these ideas into his drawings.
Mhm.
But unlike, others from his generation, I guess like the Gene Colans and the Buscema's that we know, wonderful artists, and pencilers and such. With Kirby, he was also a storyteller, and sometimes the two don't mix, right? He could do both.
Mhm.
And when he started doing his, Captain America and onward and such, and just the unfathomable. I mean, he did just so much work, right? He had that sense, but then again, he had to provide food for his family. He had, like many, a huge work ethic, and he had to basically separate. I may want to do this, but I'm not going to do a job just because my artistic sensibility is going to be affected. I don't think that probably even crossed his mind, and so he just did his work, and happened to be very good work for the most part.
Right.
And so you have that. But also he's of that generation of the science fiction, that there was that before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki generation of the bomb, and how that
Right.
affected the imaginations of storytellers. And then the stories that came afterwards in science fiction, in filmmaking and such, and in stories and in comics, right? And I think that influenced him. And I think when you mentioned Clark, I think I saw in one of those magazines that you have, maybe that Dark Side magazine, I don't remember. I think they interviewed his wife or someone. He goes, he was always reading, he was always reading his books, not just science fiction, but he was literary. He read books. And also when those paperbacks began to come out, those in the 60s, particularly the Dawes and all the others, I think it was Dawes and the others, with incredible images, those paintings, right? Like, I don't know the artist's name of those science fiction paperbacks.
Mhm.
I know that infused his imagination. It had to. It just had to, with Fantastic Four and onward, right? And when we get to the Fourth World, when he has full control what he wants to do, I think it has something to do with that, with his imagination. But I think at the heart of it, he's an artist. He's working in the commercial industry, and you got to, put back, whatever artistic sense you have, and say, I can't do this because it's gonna offend me as an artist. Again, it wouldn't cross his mind, I think, to have said that. I got a job to do. Let's do it, and do the
Right.
best that I can. I will say one more thing about this. I think of Grace Kelly, not Grace Kelly, but of Gene Kelly, the dancer.
Right.
Right. Gene, you saw him, right? Great performer, great dancer, filmmaker. But I remember an interview with his daughter or so about him. And he said about Kelly, he respected people's professions. For example, with a tailor. If a tailor could make a great suit. Now, he was basically already in an economic class that was, quote unquote, above the tailor. But he didn't see it that way. He saw the craftsmanship he could do as a tailor. When he went to a restaurant, if the maitre d' knew what he was doing, he respected that. He didn't respect someone who was doing that job and just saw it as his job and didn't take it seriously.
Right.
And so I see him with Kirby as an artist, writer, penciler. He took it seriously, whatever he was doing. And it didn't matter. It was just, for making money. He saw it. This is my work. I'm going to take pride in it. In the sense, you could be a janitor. You take pride in your work. You shouldn't be ashamed that you're a janitor. If you're a lawyer, you do your job. You make sure you represent your clients correctly.
Mhm.
You're a teacher. You're effective in the classroom, etc. Right? So in that sense, that's how I see Kirby. And I, showing his Fourth World stuff, the Command stuff that I know you loved him. What he did there, and the longevity of this and the beauty of it, and you see that in him, And one final thought, I guess, is this: is I think his immigrant, well, not much immigrant, but just his American background, whatever that may mean, his World War II experience. Getting into fights as a kid in a working class background. There's always a little bit of that in his comics, just like in Texas. Terry Southern, who was from Texas, he wrote Dr. Strangelove. There's a little bit of Texas in there. Patricia Highsmith, who was from Fort Worth area, she's known for the Talented Mr. Ripley novels, but she went to Paris. She's spent most of her life in Europe. There's a little bit of Texas in her novels. I think there's a little bit of you, or wherever you grew up, had a strong impact on you. If you're an artist, right? It's going to be there. It's going to be there. So anyway, that's what my thought on Kirby.
Well, bouncing off what you said, I realized one of the perfect things to say about him is that you're talking about Kirby's work being in, things you said: Kirby's work, Kirby's experience, Kirby's life, his background, where he grew up. Talking about Kirby, his life was as rich and diverse as his imagination and the stuff he put down. So it's amazing to me how trying to keep a thread going about Kirby is almost impossible, because the more you talk about him, the more places there are to go. And you nailed a lot there, stuff, right? I think what I liked in this interview is he was talking about things moving forward, the way he was reading stories, he could see where they were going. He didn't just enjoy the stories, he saw where they could go at the same time. That's a gift. He's sitting there doing this 2000 AD, and he thinks the machines should be the stars. Hal is misunderstood. He's a logical machine. What did you expect to happen? And just where his mind was going, and the reason he made it about machines, and how he was talking about humans and stuff, right? Just in a little question that he got in an interview. And then about a lot of his work, Darkseid was Hitler. Darkseid was, he was in World War II, so he pulled from World War II. Newsboy Legion pulled from his childhood, so it's all there. And he always said that when I do these characters, before I put the pencil down, they're already alive in my head, and I know their whole story, even with throwaway characters. I always want to compare today with back then with what's missing, and I feel like the work ethic, even when Kirby was working on stuff he didn't want to do, like you alluded to there, or to say it, is that he always took pride in it, and he's going to do his best job.
Yeah.
He goes to DC. He's like, "What's your worst selling book?" They're like, "Jimmy Olsen." He's like, "Give it to me." He seemed to be the kind of guy where he grew up during the 20s and the Depression and all that stuff like that. I kind of think that's why he was able to keep working forward and be as creative as he could and still put things into it, even when he didn't want to be doing it. He gets a lot of flack for Devil Dinosaur. I think it was just ahead of his time. He always took chances and stuff. We can talk about, in this interview, he comes up and says Spider-Man was my creation, but it became Ditko's creation because of what he did with it, if that makes sense. He was the idea. So I was going somewhere with that. I'll probably stop there. I'm going to go all over the place. When I get to Kirby, I can run at the mouth. You guys can throw a virtual slap out there. It's all right. I know how I get. But it just kind of amazes me how, hey, here's a job. Let's create something. Didn't work. I got screwed over. And the last thing I'll say that I meant to say to begin with is that they tried to ask him a little bit about how did he feel about not being able to finish the Fourth World back in the 70s and what happened and stuff. He just flat out said there's a dark side of comics and working in comics that I'm not going to get into here. So even with him getting screwed over left and right, comics, getting upset, a lot of his contemporaries, Mark Evanier, have put out how comics kind of broke his heart in places and stuff. It amazed me how he just kept going forward being an artist. Meanwhile, today, if you get on social media, that backbone is not there. Is that a good way to put it? Do we need more Kirby today? Do people need to maybe look at their contemporaries and see what others have been through and what they were doing? Am I just crazy?
Yeah, I understand Kirby being ahead of his time. Now, even when it comes to the commercial part, because if Kirby had started in the late 60s, early 70s, by the time the direct market would have shown up, if he had the popularity he had in the 80s that he actually had in the 60s. He would have been able to create a line of comics for himself inside the direct market, and he would become relevant there. One thing that I kind of noticed with the Fourth World, because when it comes to his Marvel output, Stan Lee's tendency to prop himself up drowned out what Kirby actually had, which is why we had to discover all over again what Kirby actually did at Marvel that Stan Lee didn't, because we know what Stan Lee did not do, what he was doing in 1959.
That's almost it's almost become a mystique of the Silver Age. Who did what?
Yeah, exactly.
Know.
Yeah, but in the 70s, Kirby could not create the full concise story with first because of all of the titles except Mr. Miracle were canceled. Then he started veering off into directions that had nothing to do with what he do. And then he left and he went back to Marvel, and somebody else picked them up. So in that regard, that's why Kirby, because of what he did, but because of what he left for other people to do. My first contact with the Fourth World was Legends. So that's the first time I saw Darkseid and Orion, and through the pen of John Byrne. And I fully understood the impact of the character. Darkseid is someone that walks into the page, and you can't help but notice him and what he can do and what he doesn't do, but he could. Darkseid is a character that doesn't actually do much. When you see all that he's doing, he just walks into the room and has his hands behind his back and is imposing, and he says something, and everybody's tremendously scared of him. And the next time I saw Darkseid doing something interesting was when we started reading in English. There were some market considerations here in Portugal where we stopped having superhero comics, and at the same time, I was okay. I might as well start reading we had a place here in my town that had some newsstand editions, and they were tremendously expensive. But then I found where the actual comic shops in Portugal where you could buy the comics, and I bought JLA Rock of Ages, and Grant Morrison is a huge Kirby fan. And that's when I finally saw what Darkseid really was.
Gore, are you familiar with Rock of Ages with the Grant Morrison Justice League stuff?
Yes, a little bit. I read maybe a handful of them, and but not the whole thing by Grant. Okay. But I do sense from Grant, because I read his memoir and that he wrote, which I think is pretty good. And I read some of his more wacky stuff, which I like a lot. Yeah. But certainly with Grant, you do sense that he does get that from Kirby. And I think certainly that Fourth World stuff, which is, when you look at it as an adult, it's pretty dark stuff, because like you said, Tim, and I mean, it's not just Hitler, but it's like Stalin. Mm-hmm. Because Darkseid has a presence whenever he shows up, and that's like, like Joseph Stalin. And just like Hitler did with the Jews and others, Stalin did with his own people, and his own version of concentration camps and his own slaughter of his own people, of this idea of what communism and history was about, right? Yeah. And the creation of this apocalyptic world, horrific, absolutely horrific world in that sense. But I do sense that from it, from those books.
The thing about Jack Kirby's storytelling is I will say that he needs somebody to funnel him. His ideas are so big that him talking about his ideas are better executed than some of them.
Not commercial. Certainly not by that. But I'm sorry to interrupt, but certainly by the 70s, that Fourth World stuff is not commercial stuff. First, they're new characters, right? And that, of course, FF was, new. But the thing is, they were basically also inspired by Greek mythology. And the others were too, but these were more in that tradition. It was darker. I mean, Greek and Roman mythology is very grim. I mean, you may have the hero, but the think of of Jason. Jason from the Argonauts, right?
Mhm.
Jason has the first Justice League, you should speak. He's got Hercules, he's got Orpheus. They go and search for this golden fleece, right? He goes over there, and then Medea betrays her family to help him. But then the gods are interfering because the gods are making Medea fall in love with him because they have their own interest in this, right? So anyway, he gets the golden fleece. He's the hero. Years pass. He's with Medea. He goes involved in adventures. Gets back with another woman, a princess. He already has children with Medea. And he says she will now be the queen. Medea is torn by this. She betrayed her own family, had her own brother killed for Jason. Unbeknownst to her, the gods were messing with her. But leaving that aside, Jason is now betraying her. How can you hurt him? The lineage. As much as it pains her, she kills her own children. She's not entirely the villain. I don't see her entirely as a villain. But now Jason, who was a hero, is no longer so much of a hero. And that's just it with these Kirby stories. You don't get that sense from Orion. Orion's a dark character, right?
That's exactly where I was going to go. Yeah, go. Yeah,
right. And then when Walt Simonson did his wonderful run, you get him, and you see Orion. Maybe it's Kirby, maybe envisioned if he could do it before he said, "No, these books aren't working, Kirby." Off. So
what Orion was from Kirby is that Orion is our frustration, the Hunger Dogs, all of us. See, this is what I'm saying. Talking about his work is better executed than what he actually did in the stories, which may be a good thing or a bad thing. But basically, Orion is a killer. Orion is Darkseid's son. He is a killer. He is raised by the good gods. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the more benevolent.
And then, but the thing about it is that he is symbolic of our frustrations, of the Hunger Dogs of our lives and things like that. And he's going to reach a point that when he snaps, it's like a revolution. He's going to rip somebody apart. And that's the magic of Orion for me, is when is this going to happen? There's always like this tension, and when is he going to snap within there? Which I think is just fantastic. And yeah, I think Orion and a few of them tapped on that. That's what became about fathers and sons. The only redeeming quality that I think Kirby gave Darkseid is that a father will never truly hurt or try to kill a son. That's going back to like Abraham and stuff. I never knew anything about Judaism until I read the New Gods when I was about 12. When I went back and looked at it and started saying, now, wait a minute, this starts sounding familiar in places.
That's true. His Jewish background is also important.
Yeah. So I saw a lot of that in there and stuff. I love, and guys, we can go wherever you want now. I got that Kirby stuff off my chest, so don't feel obligated to stick to this.
I wanted to pick up on something that Gore said about the Greek mythology aspect, and while Kirby being Jewish, he drew a lot on Jewish Christian mythology. What you just said about Darkseid not really wanting to hurt his son, I think Darkseid would be very proud of being killed in battle by Orion, and in that regard, it's like Zeus replacing Hyperion, and the Olympians replacing the Titans in Greek mythology. That's what Darkseid hopes to accomplish, because the Titans were Bronze Age warrior kings. The Olympians are Iron Age warrior kings. They are supposed to be superior. So when Zeus displaces Orion, displaces Hyperion as king of the gods, and turns Mount Olympus as the place above the clouds, where he is now watching humanity. He is finally fulfilling what is supposed to be. The fact that Orion defected, let's say, to Highfather and New Genesis, if Orion becomes the heir of New Genesis, the new king of New Genesis, by killing Darkseid, I think that I think Darkseid would see that as a win, because it would be a part of him that would darken the New Genesis, the presence of New Genesis forever, because it was that violent aspect of Orion, which finally brings the victory to a place of peace.
I'm not going to dig through my bookshelf. You about had me doing it, but there's two things in Kingdom Come. Alex Ross alluded to that's what happened. If you get the trade of Kingdom Come, there's 3 pages there, I think, where you think it's Darkseid by silhouette. It's Orion ruling over Apocalypse, and I think it's pretty much what you said. The other thing is that there is a speech somewhere of Darkseid talking about Orion that I can't think of where it's at right now, and it kind of matched what you're saying, a little bit,
Well, yeah, I reached over for this wonderful book by Robert Hughes on Goya, which came out in the early 2000s. And we all know this painting by Saturn devouring its sons, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's not letting me give you full page. I don't know why. Okay.
That's okay. You can see it there. I think you're familiar with this famous painting by Goya. It's Saturn devouring its sons because it believes that one of them will kill him one day, right? And
there's another thing that you said, Gore, that I found interesting, the way that Kirby uses his characters. And then we go back to the 60s Marvel output, because a lot of them, when they start, they already have faults. And that brings me back to the 12 labors of Hercules and what the motivational aspect for doing those 12 labors is. Because Hercules succumbed to his wrath, and he killed his wife and children. And how can you possibly atone for that? Now, being in Greek mythology, you do something heroic and you atone for that. But in the end, your wife and children are still dead because of you. And I see that I see that in the Hulk, because Bruce Banner sacrifices himself to save Rick Jones. And while Bruce Banner is the hero of the piece, it's Rick Jones who has the burden of knowledge of what he did to Bruce. While in Fantastic Four, it's the hero of the piece who carries the burden of knowledge, because Reed Richards has to live on knowing what he did to Ben Grimm. And so that's where the dark aspect is seen in the Marvel characters that was missing from the DC Silver Age, and even from, because the DC Silver Age characters are still very much Golden Age, in that they're whatever it is that's wrong with them, it's easy to overcome. The Flash turns is a inability to arrive on time into a way to disguise a secret identity, which goes back to being to all the Golden Age characters who are still playing Zorro or the Scarlet Pimpernel, where they're pretending to be complete idiots in order to disguise the fact that they're no longer idiots. And Green Lantern, I can shoot color yellow. Well, I'll shoot at the ground where the yellow character is standing, because the ground's not yellow. That's easy to overcome. But when your weakness is coming from inside you, Reed Richards, I turned my best friend into a freak of nature. How do I make it easier for him to live on, knowing that it's my job, but it's still going to be frustrating living as he is. Bruce Banner,
from the external to the
Rick
internal.
Jones, I created the monster. Yeah. And even Thor, you see that. Here I am trying to make my father proud of me, but he never acknowledges that. So how can I be sure that I will one day become the ruler of Asgard? And it would be so easy to just go away from it all and go to Earth, where people like me, and I can be a true hero without consequence, just doing good, because knowing that people will worship me. But it still comes back. It's the dutiful son.
But also the brothers. I mean, when you talk that, I like how you said the burden of knowledge, right? Is when Cain killed his brother Abel, and I guess his punishment, atonement, is that he can't be killed, right, by another man, correct? And he has to have.
Yeah.
Now, in some versions,
in Cain's case, that'll be the easy way out. Yes.
Yeah, and he must live with this in a sense, And so, I mean, we can't get into the psychoanalysis of Kirby, but again, if you get into, if you can just put yourself in the shoes of an artist and all the things that were the unconscious and the conscious level when he or she were doing their creations. I think all these had to play with Kirby. They had to, right? And that it fuses imagination because, like we're discussing here, we were sensing these things. I don't think we're reaching at straws. We're not doing some kind of strange analytic study of these things or scholarly thing or just interpreting things that shouldn't be there. I think we're discussing things that are maybe a little bit obvious or maybe things that, make sense. We're not really, stringing up some insane, ludicrous theories about it. I think all these things played in his storytelling and made him just a fantastic storyteller. But again, at the heart of it, he was an artist. It's like Goya was an artist, and what he saw in his mind. Regarding Goya is actually a good one because Goya, when he was starting out, he was doing court paintings. He needed to make money. But even his paintings when he was painting these kings and queens, there'll be something in those paintings which would say something about how hollow some of them were, or how basically luxury had basically corrupted them. And you wouldn't really notice it. They wouldn't have noticed it. They would think, oh, great, you've painted me. But if you look closely, you're thinking, he looks a little bit bloated there. And we all know he had 3 mistresses and that some of his kids were not his kids. Now, the people at the time knew that, right, among their circle, right? And so, but then when Goya can really go in his own, especially when he did Caprichos are these satirical pieces that he did about society at the time, where he takes no prisoners, the upper class, the middle class, the lower class, something that Luis Buñuel, the great Spanish filmmaker, did in his movies. And he takes no prisoners. Basically, humanity is humanity, and we are what we are, the good and the bad, and whatever, and such. But again, Goya had to make money. He had to make a living, but he still tried to put something in there, like Kirby.
Right.
Like I think we all agree here. I see these comic creators as true artists who, need to be respected as such, even though they work for the funnies, and the general public has no respect for them as they would for Goya.
I think there's a little bit to be said about mystique and not knowing what's going on behind the curtain. You know what I mean? You talking about these artists. To me, comics is an art form of the 20th century, and it's very important in my eyes. You can actually see the history. I've said it before. You can go back and see these kids, and a lot of them are, parents of immigrants and stuff like that, very poor kids and stuff. They were doing this stuff to support their family as teens before they went and fought World War II. And they were making the rules and figuring out things and making it into the art form, figuring out how to tell these stories, how to control the reader, the time of the reader, the psychological, how do we use color to show that this is the climax of a page, things like, little things like that you can point to this stuff. And I think we've gotten so far away from that. I feel like a lot of this stuff is being lost to where it could be in lost art form at some point, which is ironic because people have to work very hard to get in the business, if that makes sense, that business part of it. I don't know. It's really sad to me, a little bit with knowing how comics got elevated, how they got there, how they built on each other. Frank Miller talks about Will Eisner. Alan Moore will talk about Steve Ditko. There was the people that came before us, there was this acknowledgement, this is where it came from. They say that. I don't see a lot of that now, and I think that's one of the few times that, I think we grew up at a very lucky time having this stuff. I'm always counting myself lucky to be reading comics from now to then. I had all this stuff before me, all the stuff that was going on, and seeing how it moved forward there for quite a while, So I think there's a lot to be said for the art form. And I do believe it will be studied one day. I don't know about you guys, though they will pick certain people to study, Right now they have things where people will study Watchmen for a credit, an extra credit and stuff like that, But
Yeah,
I don't.
studying Watchmen is kind of got to be the easy way out. You know, sometimes I wonder if the way that the United States emerged as a society prevented it from growing past a certain threshold when it comes to self analysis of its own culture, and you'll never be able to think of comics as an immediate expression of culture that gets lost the next day when a new comic shows up on the newspaper's funny page.
You know, lobster used to be a peasant food, right?
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
Lobster used to be a peasant food, and then all of a sudden, one day, it wasn't. You know, and that's how I feel about comics. I feel like we've been there, and it's going to happen again one day. But it's going to be sort of a nostalgic thing where people look back. You know what I mean? Like swing music hit big in the '90s. All of a sudden, this 50-year-old genre of music hit big. Brian Seltzer really was the one that brought it back. I think that's what's going to happen with comics one day in the future. It's going to be this weird thing where people look at this genre that these people lived with back in the day. You know what I mean? And they're going to have a whole interpretation of what they were doing in those books and stuff and what was going on. You know?
yeah. Because right now in Europe, and we made comics intellectual. They have a preamble of some sort of book piece that never got published, but it's available for free on academia.edu, which is how Maurice Horn transformed comics academia by bringing what the French were doing to the United States. But even the French right now, they're not being that intellectual when it comes to raising up what it is that's being done right now. So I think we're all going through a period of where we're not analyzing the important things, and we're all just instead we should be in academia discussing this, talking about the influence of Kirby, but here we are on a YouTube channel, just the three of us, three fans. We can all claim to be experts on what we're doing, but ultimately we don't have the credentials to show how experts we really are. But in order to bring all this, I think it's up to us as fans to keep it alive, knowing that it has to be more than just this is my favorite comic.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, unfortunately, I mean, I had the Strange Tales. I mean, the Doctor Strange stuff. I had all of the issues. I sold them off many years ago. But I remember reading through one of them that had in the letters page, and there was a letters page, and then there was a little note there by Stan Lee or somebody there. And I'm almost sure I remember reading, and these comics, came out in the 60s, that there had been Alan Renee had been in New York City, and he had been talking about the Fantastic Four. Now, Alan Renee is one of the new wave filmmakers. He did Last Year at Marienbad, which was inspired by actually this book, which I'm going to be rereading now, The Invention of Morel, by the Argentine writer Bioy Cáceres. It came out in 1940. But Last Year in Marienbad is probably, one of the artsy films of that era, of any era. And Alan Renee is part of the Bergman group, the Truffaut group, the Buñuel group, the Godard group, right? When you think of New Wave, and Louis Malle, right? And he had this one appreciating Fantastic Four. Steranko did a 2-volume thing about the history of comics.
Mhm.
But the introduction is done by Fellini, the great Fellini, who did La Strada, who did 8.5. There was another one that came to mind. Oh, Umberto Eco in the 60s was teaching Steve Canyon to his kids as students, going over the panels. Now, not that you need these people to legitimize it, but I think that helps. It helps a freaking lot.
Mhm.
I mean, Ed Brubaker, all of us here have, I think would probably agree that he's just really, he's good at what he does.
Mhm.
You don't see Martin Scorsese doing an introduction to his criminal books. You don't see that. Or you don't see Scorsese doing an introduction to Born Again, Daredevil. You don't see a major American writer, novelist, doing the same for the comics one. Not like, maybe it's rare.
Where do you feel Philip Jose Farmer and Stephen King fall? I don't want to get off your rant too
See,
much.
they fall into, and maybe that's maybe sense in Europe, but here, Tim, that's fantasy, that's science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It's a subpar below literary fiction. You see how this works?
We're same wavelength. Yes,
that's right. And
yes.
actually, this came up a couple of days ago. There's a YouTuber. He is called Mayhem and Comics. I'm sorry, Mayhem and Mystery Mayhem. He does mostly books. He likes detective fiction, but he also reads comics. But his favorite writer is Robert E. Howard. And I've been reading I saw his video. Where is my book? You know this, Tim, and Paulo, you probably know it too. Mike, you know it too. He was talking about this book here.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. He said this was the book that he bought when he was 15 years old. And he thought it was a Conan book because it says Conan. But what it is, mostly a bunch of short stories. And I think there's a Conan book in here. But what happened was it made him a Robert E. Howard fan as a writer. And there's a beautiful story here, which is actually something that, let's see what the title of it. I want to get the title right. If anybody wants to look it up. It's a wonderful story. It's called For the Love of Barbara Allen. Yeah, For the Love of Barbara Allen. You can see it there. Mm-hmm. And it's not a Conan story. It's not a Valhalla story. It's not a sword and fantasy story. It's a story about a young man talking to his grandfather. And his grandfather has told him that this woman named Rachel is dying. She's like his age. And the thing is about Rachel, she never married because the man that she loved died during the Civil War. He was in the Confederacy, and just like his grandfather had been in the Confederacy. And they were being led by Bedford Forrest. And they knew each other before, and he dies. But before he died, his grandfather, there was a story about a note that there was another character said something about grandfather. I didn't know you looked so young. And so the young man hears this story. This woman's dying. This old story about somebody that she loved. He goes to the barn, gets hit in the head by his horse. His horse just kicks him, and suddenly he's back there. And the young man who's killed, he suddenly embodies his body. And when he sees his grandfather as a young man, because his grandfather fought in the Civil War, he looked at his grandfather before he shot in the head and said, "Grandfather, you look so young." Then when he wakes up, he goes to see this dying old woman. And when he's at the bedside of the dying old woman, she sees him, the man she loved, in him. Now, what's interesting about this story, beyond it's a beautifully heartbreaking story, is that when Howard wrote this, I think in the 1920s or so, he was doing something that Latin American writers would be known for. Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, who who are considered by academia worthy of reading. Julio Cortázar from Argentina did a series of stories where someone is riding a motorcycle and they wake up and they are in centuries in the past in Mexico being sacrificed by the Aztecs. He has no idea why he's there. So he's transplanted them back then. Now, those writers, like Cáceres, who's also from Argentina, by academia and by intellectuals and by the literary people, considered up here. And yet, little Robert E. Howard, like you mentioned, farmer, who wrote very similar stories, and also is a very good writer, his form, art subpar.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like my long answer to your question is, are they ever going to reach up there? I don't know. They haven't at this point.
That's where I come in with lobster used to be a peasant food. All of a sudden there's like this, all of a sudden it rose,
Yeah.
And I don't want to take over the conversation again. I'm loving this. Let me put it this way. This is a very selfish cast today, live cast. Like I'm loving this with you guys. Okay. But, kind of bounce off what you're talking about the elevation of things. I think a lot of it has to do with like your audience and a perception. I never knew Philip Jose Farmer was sort of mid to low brow reading, if that makes any sense.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Well,
I know Paulo loves him. I know Paulo admires him very much. I didn't know that.
I have a couple of books.
Here's where I found out. I mean, I still don't think that.
Well, because of the genre factor, I would be thinking of that. But
maybe it's okay, yeah. Well, I'll tell you where it came from. I could not find Kurt Vonnegut books in the 90s in bookstores because I didn't realize Kurt Vonnegut was viewed as a what was it? They had a word for it. Pretty much he had a cult of Vonnegut. So bookstores didn't keep his books on the shelves. You had to ask for them because people would steal them. I did not know this. Okay. I don't think that's the case anymore, right? So around the time I finally got to read Vonnegut, I was in my late 20s, early 30s where I'm reading it proper. I mean, I had an idea, and he had that writer in his books that would pop up, Kilgore Trout. Kilgore Trout was this guy who wrote the science fiction that would end up back in the back of smut magazines, and maybe he would get like this lowbrow publisher to put his little paperback out, but you had to like dig for his stuff. So Philip Jose Farmer connected with Kilgore Trout, wrote Kurt Vonnegut a letter and said, I want to write a book that is by Kilgore Trout. And I read this interview. Well, I don't know if it was the interview, but it's in the beginning of the book that I have where Philip Jose Farmer is explaining that Kilgore Trout is what Kurt Vonnegut, that's the kind of writers he hates, people that do those genre things like that. And he didn't know if Vonnegut was going to go along with it because Philip Jose Farmer is Kilgore Trout in his eyes. And I'm like, what? Did you follow that? And Vonnegut was like, well, I don't want people to get confused thinking I had anything to do with this. And he's like, I'll take care of it, which is why there's so many little things out there making sure that he's making sure that he's letting people know Vonnegut had nothing to do with this book. He just gave me permission to write as Kilgore Trout. And it's called Venus and a Half Shell, which is actually mentioned in a Vonnegut book. And it's on my next, it's 3 down on my reading list. I've had that book for 2 years. I haven't got around to it yet. Him writing as Kilgore Trout. This was an eye-opener to me of like, is this why I don't forget a lot of conversations about the things I read? I thought it's just where I enjoy dead authors. Like I'm reading the same stuff that I either was fascinated with or saw as a kid, and I can finally get that stuff, and I love it, But yeah, I never considered, I never thought Kilgore Trout was on the level as Philip Jose Farmer, with everything that he's written and how versatile he is, So that's why this is a very selfish cast being with you guys, because it's like I love this kind of conversation. So
I think
y'all go anywhere you want with it.
I think that Vonnegut is a bit like Kirby, where he didn't live to take advantage of his fame the way he should have, and there's also the thing he probably wanted to do, which you can only do with a literary pen name. With a pseudonym, and then here comes Farmer, who is becoming successful in science fiction circles, doing pretty much takes on other people's work. and he wants to take over your pseudonym.
Well,
The relationship did not end. That relationship did not end well because you'll remember that Philip Jose Farmer did that sex story with two different species called the lovers,
that's
and
in my list. Yeah.
the Vonnegut's comment was, "Oh, you sold a sex story to a science fiction magazine. Big deal. I've been selling science fiction stories to sex magazines for years."
Right.
Yeah,
Here's
that's
my
the problem because the things that he wanted to write, he had to publish in smut magazines.
Well, that's off kind of what you said. I'm going to do my hot take here real quick. I think the reason I like Kirby, Philip Jose Farmer, and I could acknowledge people like Salinger and Vonnegut and a lot of these people, are great writers. I mean, they are, but I think the reason I'm drawn to like the Kirbys and the Philip Jose Farmers and stuff is they're a lot more positive. When I read Salinger and I read even Great Gatsby and things like this, some of those books and stuff like that, there's this jadedness to it. And I feel like some of the writers grew up wealthy and they were edgy and jaded with life to begin with. There's a little bit of negativity in there. And I just don't, to me, that's what you're supposed to get past in life. It's one thing to do art and express those feelings, write about it and give your viewpoint of the world. But I like the things where there's a positive take. I'm going back to Kirby. Kirby took on things that we've mentioned, war and poverty and growing up poor and all that stuff. There's always like this faith in the future going forward with it. You know what I mean? Like he's always looking forward. We move on and stuff. I read what's this? Why am I going blank on the Salinger? A Catcher in the Rye, and there's just this jadedness all through the book, right down to where he's watching a performer at a bar playing piano, and he knows this guy does it every night, but he puts on the same smile and tries to put in the same energy, and it's all fake. I don't like that stuff. I think there's a place for it, but it seems like all the great writers do that. And that's what people pick up on, a jadedness in life. I don't know. Meanwhile, you get this lowbrow genre stuff, and it's either funny or it's about the future. Even when Philip Jose Farmer wrote about the end of the universe, where he takes place in 10 million years in the future, where the sun's about to burn out, and there's sentient vegetation walking around and stuff like that. There's always just like this fun hopefulness with it, but it's not campy, if that makes sense.
I think there is that sense with the science fiction writing and fantasy. I mean, again, I'm limited on my reading on this genre, but I do sense with some of the writers, they do have that sense of, especially with the American writers, but they may be having to do with the American strain.
Okay.
Of always being positive, always putting up a facade. And you're a federal Southerner, Tim. I think one of the valid criticisms they would have about Southerners is that sometimes I don't know if they're being sincere, because we always say, "Oh, that's great, that's fantastic, oh, wonderful," and then you're wondering, then they turn away and they'll go, "Oh my God, can you believe what she was wearing?"
Yeah.
And we love everything, right? I think there's that sense of our geniality, our politeness. Sometimes is it superficial? Is it nice? But I think it's something about the Americans, right? I think Europeans see that all the time, in the sense that they see that, you're being honest about these things or what. And back to the stories of any kind. I mean, one of the science fiction writers I do like, but he's not an American, is Stanislaus Lem, the writer of Solaris.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
Okay.
I like his books. I like his books a lot.
Okay.
And in Solaris, if you're familiar with it, it was remade into a film about 20 years ago with
George Clooney.
Yep. Not a bad film, but for me, the original by Tarkovsky, the Russian, is fantastic. And that's what got me. I saw the film and I read the novel and introduced me to Lem. And there you have basically a planet that's a living planet. It's an ocean-based planet. And its defense mechanism, at least they think it's a defense mechanism, is that it's a satellite of Earthlings, is that it's able, when you sleep, to capture something from your unconscious or something you're not able to let go or something that's very important to you, and it manifests itself. And the case of the psychiatrist who's there to see what's happening to the people on the ship, on the interstellar satellite there is when he wakes up, there's a woman by his bedside, and it's his wife who years ago had taken her own life.
Mhm.
And at first you think, what? And she looks like his wife, smells like his wife, feels like his wife, does the same things his wife would say, but it's not his wife. And it's like a memory, even if you try to put it away, you can't let it go. And there's other people there living with their own issues. And it ends in a way, very ambiguous, but it leaves you certainly thinking and living uncomfortable thoughts. I mean, all of us here have things we know we need to move past on, and we do our best effort to it. But when you sleep, your dreams, they have their own thing going.
Mhm.
And then you wake up and thinking, damn it, why did I have that dream? And it kind of like ruins the rest of your day. And I think you have writers like Salem and such who maybe they're jaded or whatever, but I agree with you, Tim. But I sense they bring that sense of reality. Now I prefer those writers.
Okay.
And, I engage with them much better.
I got to be in the mood. I need to be in the mood to read something like that. You know what I mean?
For example, Star Trek, right? The success, I think, the longevity of that, even though, for network television, it was always positive about the future. I mean, and when humanity ventures out, we find the best in other species and such, and usually they always ended in happy endings and such, right? But sometimes it may be more like Lamb or like Arthur C. Clarke. It may be more ambiguous and darker, or like what did Stephen Hawking say before he died? That if ever came to Earth, you don't want that. Because if they've traveled from another solar system all the way over here, the amount of energy it would take to get over here, they're not coming here just to say hello. They're coming here because they need this planet. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, when I said I don't, I have my little Kurt Vonnegut collection over here. I have the same copy of Great Gatsby that I've read probably about 20 times, since the 90s. I have all that stuff. There's room for it. So if I bashed them, I didn't mean to come off.
No, I didn't think you bashed them, not at all.
Yeah, we have a question here. Rob Ripa is loving this, what we're doing. This is I'm loving this cast, what we're talking about here, man. We read, Neuromancer, William Gibson's Neuromancer. I have not read that.
No, the Gibson, he's part of that, what became known as cyberpunk.
Yeah.
When that book came out, I think in the 80s, I remember reading reviews all about that book. And that always evaded me. And I still haven't read any of Gibson's books.
I thought I knew what cyberpunk was. And I wonder if it was Ripa that got me. I thought I knew what cyberpunk was until I was doing something here, and somebody let me know that Blade Runner is considered cyberpunk. And that
right.
blew my mind.
It is. It's considered cyberpunk.
Yeah, I realized I knew nothing about cyberpunk like I thought I did. So I got humble. I've humbled myself because that really blew my mind. I watched Blade Runner in the theater when I was 9. I've watched it hundreds of times, and for me not to catch that, very humbling. So.
The notion of cyberpunk is that it appears in literature where you don't rely on images to portray the future. I guess the closest that you had before cyberpunk became a thing would be Logan's Run. Because that is a dystopian future, but every character thinks that none of the characters think they're living in a dystopia.
I think I accentuate the punk of it because to me, cyberpunk is Johnny Mnemonic. If you remember that movie from the 90s, a little bit schizophrenic. You never knew what was going on. Fast, loud. The punk part is what gets me. I've thought about this a lot. So for it to be slowed down and a little bit intellectual, dystopian and stuff like that, I'm stuck on the punk part. Tank Girl to me would be cyberpunk in my mind. I've got it all mixed up in my head of what it is, so I've trained myself over and over the years what I thought cyberpunk was. I did it to myself,
I mean, when it comes to science fiction, I guess those writers, in a sense, would be. I mean, I think you guys know this is J.G. Ballard for me. I mean, Ballard's one of the science fiction writers, which is actually among literary people.
Yeah.
He's like at their equal. I know this because I remember it must have been the 90s. Martin Amis died a few years ago. He was good friends with Christopher Hitchens. And Martin Amis was that generation of Ian McEwan, who wrote Atonement, Salman Rushdie, Pat Barker. I mean, it was like that new, and Jeanette Winterson. It was that new generation of late 80s, early mid 80s, mid 8 to late 80s of new wave, not new wave, but the new British invasion in literary fiction. Amos went to interview J.G. Ballard. Who did Crash. We know him from the book Crash. The first film that was Empire of the Sun is a memoir. When he lived in Shanghai.
That's the one. Yes,
that's the one that Spielberg did with a young Christian Bale. And he went to interview Ballard because Amos, if you've seen Crash, is about the obsession with celebrity, automobiles. The early 70s is you have a man whose fantasy is to die in a car crash with Elizabeth Taylor in the car and have an orgasm. So Ballard was writing about the future, about maybe not reality television so much, but this obsession with celebrity and all these, insane things. He also had written a novel called High Rise around the same time. And in High Rise, it's like Lord of the Flies, in a high-rise building where people refuse to leave and they do terrible things to each other. Anyway, Martin Amis goes to interview him, and he's surprised by how conventional he was. His living. He had a family, had kids. His first wife had died from an illness, and when she was young, he was remarried. He's nice and conventional. He's very polite. And he's thinking, this is the man who creates these worlds, these dark worlds. And the way Ballard, like Wells, saw technology, H.G. Wells, because Ballard is a good heir to H.G. Wells. And his technology is what it is. Like YouTube is what it is. However, you put us into the circle. Tim, I think you've been a positive force for YouTube. Other things you've done over the years. And as has Paulo. And I think myself have.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have other YouTubers who are not. The ones who feed, on all these awful things. It's not YouTube's fault. It's us, right? So Ballard did this whole storyline about this. Anyway, so Amos was quite surprised by this. The thing what surprised me at the time, I had not read Ballard, but had read Amos. But in a way, Amos, and all these other writers admired Ballard as one of their own. And so Ballard, he's up here for the most part. But of course his stories are just grim. I mean, it's, there's like the Black Mirror TV series. The Black Mirror TV series from the BBC was influenced by Ballard. The creator has acknowledged him as an influence on his storytelling. And those are, dark stories about things. But I think there's a balance of things. You like Farmer. I like Burroughs. I like those Tarzan novels.
Mm-hmm.
And they generally end happy, but it's not about that. It's about the stories, right? There's not so much I want these kind of endings and such. But it's just about the stories in the end in themselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was so surprised to find out there's a Burroughs Society. I mean, it's amazing when you kind of
I'm not surprised
out and you go to these places and you find out there's like these I don't like calling them fans, these scholars. These scholars out there. See, here's some stuff that why I actually love this. We're getting Altered Carbon out there. I'm kind of familiar with that. This surprised me. William Gibson got brought up by Rob Ripa.
That is true. I had heard that. That's true. I forgot about that. That's
right. Yeah. This is why I love doing this. This web of how everything connects with some of these hobbies and genres and stuff. Daniel Miller's lyrics to Warm Leatherette is based on J.G. Ballard's Crash. And Rob has just gone over my head. Does this sound familiar to you guys? Yeah.
Daniel Miller's lyrics, Warren.
We don't think of genre. We don't think of genre fiction as having an effect on music, but sometimes
Oh.
it does.
I didn't know
even if
about
it's
that.
just superficial. Yeah.
Because Ballard, we discussed it with Tim a while ago. I mean, Ballard was an influence on Gary Newman, Joy Division, David Bowie. They all allude to him. But this, who he mentioned, I didn't know.
I have a book that was going to be a sketchbook, and I had to put it to the side because one night, randomly, I started writing down songs in it and stuff. I was going to make a little playlist or something, and it turned into songs that were influenced by like Hawkwind with Elric. You know what I mean? Monster Magnets with a song called Melt, where it's got a line, he remembers when the world should have cried when Jack Kirby died. All of a sudden, I started coming up with 2 or 3 pages of this stuff that's influenced by what people read and things like that. It just popped in my head one night. I'm going to have to find it.
I happen to have this randomly here, this Jim Morrison poetry book.
My favorite bit of science fiction and music, it's just a throwaway line. There's a hip hop group from the 90s called the Dream Warriors, and they have my definition of a bombastic jazz style, and they have an amazing line at the end of the song, which references bags of mostly water, which comes from the Star Trek TNG episode. But it's funny because even if you don't see the science fiction in the lives of artists, it shows up where you least expect it.
Yeah, it does. I mean, what is it? The Ghost in the Machine by the Police. Now, that album sounds very science fiction-y, but it's got that song, "The Invisible Sun," which is, that line is from a 17th century nobleman named Mr. Thomas Brown, who wrote this wonderful essay on urn burials. He would find these urns and just define their, talk about their, who are these people, these ashes, right? And he goes into this history of burials. Either you bury somebody, you burn them, or you just leave the bodies out for the vultures and such. And when I listened to that song when I was a kid, I liked the Police, and that song, Invisible Sun. And then years later, when I read Sir Thomas Brown, I'm thinking, oh, that's where Sting got this from. Because he's got this beautiful line. But Thomas Brown is, life is a pure flame, and we live with an invisible sun within us. That's where that comes from. And then when I read Styron, who's known for Sophie's Choice, his first novel was Lie Down in Darkness, which is a line from Sir Thomas Brown, and quoted in here. And the thing is about, you have these beautiful lines where you see them in unexpected places. And one final note about the Police is what led me to Lolita by Nabokov. And because it was a girl that I knew when I was at university. I was working at a restaurant, and this girl would always be there smoking her cigarettes. Very pretty girl. We became really good friends. We're still friends to this day. And we're talking about books, and we began engaging about books. I don't know what the hell I was talking about, but what she made me say is, "Have you read Nabokov's Lolita?" And I go, "Lolita? No. I don't know who Nabokov is." And she goes, "You know that song by the Police?" And I can't think of the song by the Police. And I go, "Yeah. Well, I think you might like this book." So now to this day, I always remind her, "You're the one that have a whole shelf of Nabokov books over there." And I always remind her about Lolita. And she goes, "Well, you stop it. This is very disturbing that you like that book so much." And it's not just that book was all of Nabokov. But it's, you find it in unexpected places.
Roxanne, we've got 62 Lefty Blues right on this.
Oh yeah, Roxanne.
And he went exactly where I was going to go with it. One of the great things about it, if this was a decade ago, this is what juices me up. You bring up the Police, and all this stuff came rushing back about how well read Sting is and stuff, and where some of that stuff comes from.
He was an English teacher, I think.
Yeah. It's just amazing. Now, the thing about some of the genre stuff we're talking about, I got really excited when I found out Hawkwind, who was never really big over here in America. You either know or you don't. That's the thing. They wrote songs about science fiction. Silver Machine's a great song, And then I found out they would actually have a guy dressed up like Elric come out on stage. And they actually had Michael Moorcock write a song with him and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I go ahead and I find it, I track it down, and I ordered this CD, and it's horrible. But I've kept on to it just because it's Elric. And
so
I keep my objectivity. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to recommend something that I'm not really enjoying, but it's so cool just to have. You know what I mean? A little bit of a completist there. Like, I've got this record, about the Black Sword and all that stuff, and it's not very good at all. But there's like just a passion there, I guess, where if we hung out, we would still talk about some of the same things. So there, you kind of get a pass. I'm going to keep it over here. But yeah.
Yeah, Moorcock is in this part of Texas. I mean, I know he's still here because he was living off the Austin area. Because I think his wife is an American, and I think the mother of his wife was getting health care in this part of town. I mean, this part of Texas.
Well, Michael Moorcock was born in, I think, 1939, and it's blowing my mind he's still producing. Yeah.
I'd love to interview Moorcock. I'm sure a conversation with him would be fascinating. I have sort of a mind that it is probably very easy to talk to once you get him going. I don't know, but Moorcock is a guy who's not afraid to talk about what he likes and he doesn't like. So, in that regard, he probably has some very interesting opinions about his work and how it affects the literary world and it affects his readers.
Well, politics, because he was at I think I emailed it to Tim. He was in an interview with Alan Moore. They're
That's
both
what I was bring up. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And Michael was talking about he had been at some bar here in Texas, and he had been either someone was I think he was talking about the National Healthcare Service in Europe and talking about how you have all these social programs there and such, and in a positive way. But then some guy comes up to him, this big burly guy he describes, and comes up to him. And I think somebody accused Michael of being a communist or something like that during the bar. Somebody there, and but that's typical in Texas. I mean, if you talk about any kind of program like this, the whole idea that must be communism is just so part of our fabric.
Gotcha.
People just react this way, right? To something thinking it's, and sometimes you may say, no, actually, James Madison said this, huh? Yeah, it's not. No, James Madison, founding father, architect of the Constitution, he said this. Oh, and that's a whole different conversation. But some burly guy comes up to him, he goes, he disagreed completely with Michael Moorcock. But he would say, he would basically stand up with him to have the right to say what he wanted to say. And so, but anyway, Michael's experience here, because he liked visiting these places here in town. Well, here in Texas.
Alan, wait a minute. Somebody's brought up Alan Moore here, but I haven't seen the show. I'm well aware of it. Alan Moore has made a movie, and it's like his stories come to life. I'm in a weird place with Alan Moore, which isn't that big a deal, but I don't want to meet him. I love his work, but he's a character. The more I found out about his personal life, the more I'm like, we wouldn't meld. You know what I mean? Like, he really thinks he's a sorcerer or whatever. He studies the occult. He was in a relationship with 2 women, and then the 2 women ran off and left him and took the kids. There's just a lot of things going on with him where I'm like, I'm just not the big, I dabbled around with the bohemian lifestyle there in my 20s, ran around with an art crowd, but I like the man for his work. I like when he talks about his work and things like that. But personally, when it comes to these side projects and stuff, I'm real careful. In case he starts bringing in weird stuff, that I'm just sort of like, okay, I'm one of those people. It's one thing. Huh?
The BBC's done a lot of stuff with Alan Moore. If you Google BBC Alan Moore, you'll find a lot of documentaries and series, more than we expect. Yeah, but it's just that they don't hit the syndication circuit to show up in other places. The notion that I get is that Alan Moore is at least respected in some form of literary intelligentsia.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Even outside comics in the UK, and the UK is not Europe when it comes to comics. It's not France. It's not Belgium. It's not Italy. But Alan Moore is respected. The thing, what I always think, that Alan Moore wanted to live a normal life with his weirdness.
Yeah.
And I guess he never had the chance.
Where it's like, it's just too, I can't think of two more. Amazingly enough, his art, we could sit here and talk about the same comics and music, I can tell, that kind of thing, the pop culture stuff probably. But when it comes to lifestyles, I can't think of, it's almost like this is the antithesis of me. This would be the anti-Tim of everything that comes out about his personal life and his interest in things. He had a talk about in one of the, I can't remember what it's called now, a landscape of Alan Moore or something or other. But he had a thing where I completely agreed with him, where he was talking about due to technology, how it started out, it used to take twice as long for us to move forward in technology. And probably in the last 50 years, it's moved so fast where it went from like sort of like a liquid comparison to where now we're in society of steam that's moving so fast. And I'm like, yes. And then he turned around and he talked about spells being real. And I'm like, son of a bitch. Like you had me, and then we dipped down, so. Guys, I'm not on a time limit today. I can keep going. We can keep talking about whatever you want. This is a rare day for me. So
Paulo,
you can go wherever you want.
I have 1.5 hours. I have about 1.5 hours, 2 hours still left.
Yeah. And I don't want you guys to get bored or feel like we got to fill in
space
and stuff.
We
got the Kirby stuff out of the way. I'm good.
I finally meet Paulo here, and of course, Tim, I'm always grateful whenever you have me on.
I'm so glad you guys showed up. This has been fantastic. I mean, I'm actually so glad to have. I hate to use the word scholars. You know what I mean? But like,
no, we're all on the same. No, we have our own interests, Tim, and I think we're all equal here. And I will say this about Alan Moore, and I don't mean to be bleak about this.
Yeah,
but I think maybe with subsequent generations, I think Moore is going to become a creator's creator. What I mean by that is, in fiction, you have writers novelists and poets who had a pretty good following at the time when they were writing their stuff. Critical acclaim, were respected. But after a few generations, no one read them except other writers. No one admired their art except other painters. Whatever public they had didn't exist. I'm afraid that may happen with Moore in future generations. I mean, I don't want this to happen, but one thing about Moore, he's very literary in his writings.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually have to be, first of all, literate to appreciate him. He's worked with great artists, and you can appreciate the artists that worked with him, from Bissett to Campbell to Davis to Lloyd, Gibbons, huge list, Williams. But thing is, okay, well, let's understand the story. What's happening here? And I think for Moore, it may be a problem down the road, and in the sense of his readership, people who are going to read him. I mean, we may be the last generation here, who basically could really read him without being basically perplexed or bored or having to reach for a dictionary,
right?
Several times, or Google something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm afraid is going to happen with Moore. Or he'll be a subject of conversation because everyone talks about Watchmen, but no one has read Watchmen. Talk about the Killing Joke, but they talk about the controversies in the Killing Joke and the appropriateness of those pictures without reading the Killing Joke.
There's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of that my first contact with the literary work was not the literary work. The first time I saw the Three Musketeers, I was 5 years old, and it was a Spanish produced anime featuring dogs. In English, it's usually called D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds. In Spanish, it's part of the Claudio. There was a Spanish producer called Claudio Bernboyd. He died like a few years ago, but his cartoons were famous even throughout Europe. Dubbed, the production was made in Spain. That's why they look like anime. But so the original would be D'Artagnan y los Tres Mosqueteros. And he also did an adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days with a lion, starring as Phileas Fogg. And there was plenty of humor. I don't think this is a problem with writers from yesteryear becoming writers, because those writers who know how to appreciate literary works will bring forth that work into new audiences, even if they have to turn the characters into dogs. We will see them. I don't think that's a problem. The word doesn't need to get to become lost. I suppose what will make it harder is that as printing technology improved, more people became literate, access to reading has improved. There's a lot of work out there. So the trick will be how to stay relevant, even to the more literary minded, who will be the producers of the future, in making sure that these works that were the best 100 years ago will still be enjoyed by the new generation. So even if it has to be through the lens of somebody who read them first, the works will remain.
Okay.
Sorry, I had domestic issues, so.
Was it the cat?
Yeah, was it the cat? I thought the same thing.
No. When I say domestic, I mean domestic. I was going to help with groceries. I was waiting to get a text, and
Well, you can do the groceries. Me and Gore will talk.
Let's go. I know it's too late now, but the thing I was going to bounce off about Alan Moore, if that's all right, unless you guys got a conversation going. Like I said, I missed that little part. I apologize. But the thing with Alan Moore, what I'm afraid about with Alan Moore is that we're going to have sort of like what I call a Michael Jackson effect. I grew up on the radio, I'd hear the Jackson 5, great music. And then, I was there when we saw the Moonwalk on the awards show in 83 and all that great stuff, Thriller, and all this great stuff that he did and stuff, right? Then my son was born in 98 and he grew up with the weird Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? I found it hard to tell him that Michael Jackson was actually very cool back in the day. And he's grew up in the time of the legal allegations, and he's sleeping in a chamber and all the tabloid lifestyle, and he's turning white and all this weird stuff going on with him. And you cannot convince him otherwise, because that's what he grew up with. Alan Moore has said some very derogatory and crazy things over the last 10 years. And I feel like there's a whole generation of comic book people that's the Alan Moore they know. And it also, with Alan Moore doing that, it's very edgy to go back and take his arguably most famous work, I guess, The Watchmen, and try to tear it apart and say it's dated and things like that. There's an edginess, I think, when people say they hate the Beatles, they hate Star Wars, they've done this or that. I don't know anybody actually hates those. You can not have an interest. But I think it's an edgy thing to say, and I'm worried that Alan Moore, the character, is outshining the validity of his work, and that's what he's going to be Michael Jackson all over.
I'm not worried about that. Alan Moore will see a surge in popularity when he dies. Yeah, it's inevitable. And true. after he dies,
I do agree.
Only the things that he wrote will matter.
Yeah.
My argument is that the literary public, because it's already diminishing. I mean, I don't know what literacy is like in Portugal, but at least around here in Texas, my circle of people that I've known, professionals and such, and that you have to be a professional to be literate. I mean, I was working class and I was literate. But is that there's just in books, for example, in just reading books itself, it's become an issue. And I've known people where, you give them a comic, right, to their kid, and their kid says, it reminds me of school that I have to read. It's becoming a serious issue, and it's affecting comic readership. And again, with someone like Moore, which is also like, I think it's also going to affect Neil Gaiman at one point, certainly with Sandman. I think
another person.
I think it already is. I think it already is.
Yeah.
Is that you read 2 pages of Sandman or 2 pages of Watchmen or something, and you have to basically, a page will take you maybe 5-10 minutes, maybe some of these books. When you read it correctly,
Okay.
and you enjoy it, and you move on, and you lose sense of time. And I think with the readership, you're not going to have that issue. I mean, thinking, yeah, I love the Netflix series, but the graphic novels are quite boring. What they're saying by boring, not that it was boring, is because not that they're illiterate, but they haven't developed that sense of reading. And that's the thing. And that's why I think people like Moore are going to have this issue. And except with a minority of people who are going to be there. But
It's
I think
going
it's
to
shrinking
become-
and shrinking
Yeah.
until creators are going to be saying, do you know what he did with Marvel Man? This came out in the early 80s. You see what he did with that? You see what I mean? Where I'm going with this?
It's going to become harder because the sensorial experience.
Bingo. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
We like to talk about the paper smell and the technical feel of the pages. That is true. There's a certain effort into that makes it ours. The TVs, movies, even theater. Theater was how the illiterate classes got in touch with fiction in the 17th and the 18th century. When
that's why Shakespeare was so popular.
Yeah, but they didn't have to work on it. It was the people who had to learn how to read that had the work of. Oh, I have to learn how to read, and it wasn't until the industrial revolution that people were made to read because they had to read the instructions manuals on how to operate machinery.
Otherwise, it would do with their hand or more.
Yeah. And that's sort of come back because everything is pre-made.
Yeah.
Sit.
I've run across quite a few people who said they didn't read comics because they didn't understand how to read them, and I was
that is also true, and you'll find a lot of people that are far from unintelligent, who have a hard time following the structure of a comic book.
Yeah. And kind of bouncing off.
Yeah. You have the 2 sides of the brain thing.
Yeah,
it is true. Because although letters are representations of ideas which have evolved into sounds, the way that we don't perceive sounds and images in the same way. So if it's the letters turned into sounds, and we are seeing the representation of sound and the representation of image at the same time, it becomes harder. So if your brain is not plastic enough, which you have at a young age, which is why there's a perception of comics are for kids, but you need to be a kid you have to be really a child to start reading comics. Because
there's nothing like reading Akira and trying to read sound effects in Japanese. It's fantastic.
If you have an intellectual understanding of what a comic book can be, if you did not read comics before the age of 16, you're going to be very, very lost when you try to do so.
I may be getting too deep here with this next one. Rein me in, right? But Miracle Man is the one that really had me worried. I've said this before, and when Marvel was going to be 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been almost 10 years ago, not even a little bit over. They're bringing back Miracle Man. And to me, Miracle Man, Marvel Man, the mystique had grown over the years because, I like to try to remind people there's three ways to look at when you read, there's three ways to kind of take in things. The work itself, what the author was going on, and what was going on in history at the time. And comics got more and more adult over the years since Miracle Man started, that when you read it now, or even 10 years ago, it's going to be underwhelming, because the mystique grew over the years of like this great work that they never finished in things, right? So to me, I try to remind people when you read something like Watchmen or Miracle Man, if you weren't there and you really want to get about 4 books from that year or the previous year that was on a newsstand, and then read it and see what it did. So that's kind of what I'm worried about, is maybe some of the works that are celebrated, you're not going to get it because that became the standard of maturity or sophistication or what they were trying to do. Does that make sense?
A bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Daredevil, Frank Miller's Daredevil in particular, it's been imitated. There's one seminal work from the 80s that kind of gotten old really fast in the last few years. It's Camelot 3000. And when I reread it again, this looks boring now.
Well, that word progressive that got really popular over the last 10 years, that book was actually the foundation of progression, done correctly. Sir Lancelot being with the gender thing that's popular with the kids these days and things like that. It's all there, and it's handled very well, but those felt like new ideas. But yeah, that Brian Boland artwork is what carries that book in my idea. I've never really considered Mike W. Barr. Mike W. Barr felt like a very safe writer. He was able to keep a book going from month to month. He never really did anything out there. He wrote with a formula. He put a little religious quote in a lot of his books at the beginning of the story. You can tell a Michael W. He had a style. Let's put it that way. I put him in there with Doug Munch and a bunch of them guys. A lot of enjoyable stuff. If you like the guy, you like the guy. And every now and then they had a shining moment. Camelot 3000 is probably his mark for being one of the first maxi series with great Brian Boland art that started in 82, and it finished when Christ was over. I'm like, yeah, it's famous. It's infamous for other reasons and stuff, but I totally agree with you. I didn't know I had a sensitive side to the Camelot 3000. Sorry, I had a little bit of a journey with that book. So.
Well, not to disagree with Paulo's opinion about Boland, about Camelot 3000, but one thing that is a pet peeve with me, I don't have many pet peeves. I have very few pet peeves, but one of them I do find is, and this is not against you, Paulo, because I've known you for a long time, and I think I have an understanding how you see comics. I think you and I are on the same page. I think you would agree with me on this part. Is one of the pet peeves I do have when people discuss books, comics, and films from the past is this sort of sense of they'll read something like Marvel Man, they'll read something like Daredevil, and now they've read stuff that comes afterwards, right? But they've read those books for the first time, or they've seen Citizen Kane for the first time, right? The film Citizen Kane, and then they'll say this, which is basically what Tim was getting at, I think. It was okay. I go, well, why was it okay? I've seen this before. Over the past 20 years, just so when I read it, I know it came before then. This is how they talk. I know they came before then, but it's like they use the word "like" way too many times. And so it's like, I was, it was just okay. So you acknowledge that this came before all those books. And it's possible that without this book, these would not be possible. Yeah, I see that, so I wasn't that into it. See, stuff like that frustrates the hell out of me.
There used to be a time when Kingdom Come came out, and then Authority. And then you had, of all places, Wizard Magazine, people who had collected for a while, Seasons people, message boards. They were all like, yeah, this stuff was influenced by Squadron Supreme. This stuff was influenced by this book and this book. People used to be able to acknowledge and cite the stuff that influenced everything. That's gone now. Nobody's really in it. It feels like there's a generation not in. I get being young and wanting new things and to move forward. And when you're young, you do make your own culture and stuff with your friends and stuff. And that's why we get nostalgic for things. I'm oversimplifying that. So I kind of get that thing about not wanting to hear about old things. But to me, any kind of literature and stuff, that shouldn't fall in that. You know what I mean? Like, knowing where things came from and how they influence and stuff, I found fascinating.
I understand.
So that's why I try to
the
be
references.
Yeah,
I think in the United States, it becomes harder because your culture is younger.
Yeah, it's a young country. A lot of the problems we're a young country still. Yeah.
Right. One thing that we have to do in high school, we have to sort of analyze a poem by the Portugal's greatest poet, Camões, who basically became famous for ripping off the Iliad in the 1600s, in the late 16th century. But the thing, we are used to hearing about things that came well before us. Because there's a difference in language. If you go back to the late 19th century, you'll be able to have a conversation with a person from the late 19th century. They won't know what a cell phone is or an automobile, but you will understand their words and you will be able to adapt your speech to their words. Yep. If you go back to the 16th, you won't, because there are words that have changed meaning when you use them in a sentence, or they have become archaic and they're no longer useful in a conversation. They've been replaced by another word. So reading that kind of makes us aware of how society progressed. That said, there are things that you do understand that the commercial considerations that created the original story are not enough in the current commercial context. And I remember there are two things that I've read that have taught me to appreciate works that I've seen this before. One is when I finally read Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, which is the first Tintin book. That thing is not good, but it's Tintin. It's the first real European comic. Tintin in the Land of the Soviets is to French comics as Action Comics #1 is to American comics. And you have to read it, and you have to understand it, and how you have to, if you want to know where comics came from, you may not want to know that. You may be perfectly happy reading what exists now. But if you want to know where it came from, you have to read it and understand it and know how and why it's there. The other one, the second one, was when I bought Marvel did a collection in the 2000 or 2001, the Golden Age of Marvel Comics. It was a series of stories that they picked out at random from the 1940s. There's Captain America #3 in there, and there's the first Human Torch Submariner battle, and of course those aren't good. For starters, because Martin Goodman did not hire the best artists. Sure, there was Kirby working there, but apart from that, was whatever was available. But you have to understand why the comics were like that. The first you can tell that Martin Goodman thought of superheroes as a fad, even in 1939 when he published Marvel Comics #1. And so those are not superheroes. The Submariner is not a superhero in that first story. Neither is the Human Torch. They kind of don't know exactly where they're going. They feel like it can go somewhere.
The positive of that is that it was unpredictable. I mean, I get what you're saying. The blurring of the lines and stuff was unpredictable. I'm going to be blasphemous here because I get what you say about Tintin. One of the things I'm real careful is, I want to be positive, but there's certain things that I just don't get, and I see plot holes. The book that I thought was overrated, and a lot of people want to argue this may have been started the Bronze Age. There's that talk about what book was part of the Bronze Age. You know, was it when Snapper Carr turned on the Justice League, or was it when Conan #1 came out? And some people want to say it's when Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil did the social issues of Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And I'm like, why would you lecture a space cop who works with so many diverse people and stuff in space? How can you accuse them of being racist? It makes no sense. You know, I could never get past that. So it was down to the art. I would enjoy the art, you know. So yeah, you can't really have conversations with some people when they like really herald that stuff. And then what you're talking about, things moving on and stuff like that. I was wanting to say stuff like we're talking about rotary phones and manual transmissions with kids nowadays. I don't like these videos that come out where they set up teenage kids to give them a phone number, try to make them do a rotary phone. I like taking a little bit of patience and talking to people and trying to get them excited about these things and show them how it works instead of humiliating them. So I think with the older generation, I don't care if I'm lecturing now, I truly believe this. You need to be aware that you don't need to make fools of people that don't know things. I mispronounce words all the time and names because I learned them through reading. You know what I mean? So maybe that makes me a little empathetic. So I think there's a little bit of responsibility of trying to get kids excited about this new stuff and get them into it. But I'm not seeing them have that excitement for a lot of stuff because they consider it old. I think there's two sides of it. So, you know, I'll just kind of drop that there, you know, but
no, I certainly
got a lot of comments. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you went to the comments. I guess my point is that I guess I have the reverse reaction. Like when I mentioned the Conan book, right? I mean,
Right.
this one here about this story here. By the time I had read this book, I had already read, again, those Latin American writers who came after him. But my point was that instead of saying, when I read this story, oh, I've already seen this in all these stories, I'm thinking, no, it's possible that those writers didn't read Howard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Julio Cortázar, who has very similar stories, like the one I described, I've not seen a reference to him or him alluding to Robert E. Howard as being an influence or reading his stories. But you don't have to be, right? You have this idea. I mean, Borges, for example, Jorge Luis Borges talked about you have writers who write similar stories from different generations, but they've been not read each other.
Yeah.
For example, there was Nathaniel Hawthorne who wrote this story called Wakefield. I think it's called Wakefield, which is about a man who says goodbye to his wife, goes to work, gets in his carriage, drives off. So she thinks. Instead, he moves into a home directly across the street, and he never comes home. Days pass, weeks pass, years pass, and his wife doesn't know what happens to him. All this time, he's living across the way, observing her. And after decades, he leaves his home across the street, walks over, and opens the door. And that's how it ends. There's Nathaniel Hawthorne. Then you have Melville, about 30, 40 years later, writes a little story called Bartleby the Scrivener, which is about a law clerk who goes to work every day, does his work. The lawyer he works for sees him working, go home. He continues to work. Lawyer leaves, comes back, he's still there working. He does this the entire time. You know nothing about him. Sometimes you'll see him standing and stare up into the light. You just look up at the little window on the rooftop. And at the end, he just dies by a wall. That's the story, right? And then we jump to Kafka, the Metamorphosis.
Okay.
In the country, not in America, up in Prague. About a man who turns into a beetle. And is his family at first a little bit shocked that he's a beetle, but they leave him in his room, and after a while, they lose interest in him. Borges' point is, it's possible that Kafka did not read Melville. We know that Melville read Hawthorne because he dedicated Moby Dick to him. I don't remember correctly. But the point is, there's something in the imagination that influences the others. But instead of Borges reacting, when he read, Hawthorne, saying, "Oh, I've already seen this in Kafka. I've already seen this in here." He says, "No." It's quite amazing that just when I think something is so fundamentally new, you read the previous generation, no, they thought it was new. And then you go back and back and back, and you still continue to be amazed. This goes back, really far back. Instead of saying this is dated or whatever, you know. And I think when I hear that regarding movies or comics or films, but this reaction and you're almost like orthodox about it.
Hola, Tim.
Hola.
Oh,
That's my dad.
so anyway, that was my point. Yeah.
No. Oh my goodness. So, y'all feel like doing a little comments here?
Sure.
Oh, Jared's
You got a
here.
breather here?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to start here.
Okay, Jared.
We have 64 Lefty Blues, who's been all over this with Rob Ripa. God bless him, because I think Rob's been here since the beginning, if he's still out there, and 62's hung in there really well and been excited. I've been introduced to all kinds of books from you three guys. He appreciates it. John C is the guy. This is just the man. I got to tell you, man, he's subscribed. He's got that bell. I'm sure he thumbs up. This guy's ready to go anytime I come on, so I appreciate him. Be like John, guys. And we have, I've accepted at my age, I'm like Peter Ustinov's old man at the end of Logan's Run, while the general population is like Logan. What are all these books? Gore, you did subscribe the John Carter movie is what he means.
Oh.
Did he just stumble into the old dudes complaining show? I like to think seasoned scholars.
Complaining in Texas, we just call this, just morning at breakfast here in Texas.
Yeah, this is coffee time.
Hold on, Jared. That was good team, Jared.
Oh, this is a generation that is plagiarizing Wikipedia for schoolwork. And I've seen that on some YouTube channels.
Yeah, Wikipedia. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I used to really warn people about Wikipedia big time. That's how you could just they would start their YouTube videos and you could just see it word for word. And I have to say, I still wouldn't do that, but Wikipedia has gotten better over the last, 3 or 4 years. I don't know if it was the pandemic or what, but what we got here? Hold on. Reading Golden Age Submariner comics in the back of the 1970s Invaders was a shock. I actually love those. That could be some of between that and the Kirby stuff they would put in the back of the Fourth World Series that my uncle and stepdad had. Fantastic stuff, man. You always hear about the shock of the new, but no one ever mentions the shock of the old. Did we kind of touch on that a little bit?
That's exactly what we're talking about, Jared. That's exactly it. That's exactly
we talked about it. Yeah. 62 left, and everybody's saying hello. So great, man. So do you guys got any topics anyway you guys want to go? I kind of shoot
regarding the shock of the old.
Huh?
Regarding the shock of the old, everybody complains about seeing racism everywhere in old works, and no, there's only one racist use of characters, and it's Fry Collin and Robert the Conqueror. That is racist. Everything else is not.
I think you just blew my mind a little bit. Yeah, that's awesome.
If you've read Robert the Conqueror, you know what I'm talking about.
I kind of do. I don't know. That's so funny. That's awesome. Oh my god. Oh.
No, here's our friend of mine who lent me the book. Okay, there's something really racist in here. Frank Collin, slinked into a corner, slinked cowardly into a corner like the Negro he was.
Okay, that's it. I got you. Okay.
Nothing else is racist after that. Okay.
Yeah, I think you just bottom line that really well and made your case. Yeah.
You can forget it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh, so something about comics a little bit that I'm just kind of want to bring up because I got a stack here.
Sure.
But we were talking about the old and the new. Maybe this is a good segue, maybe not, but it works, right? But I'm noticing a few things with the modern comics. And yes, we're talking about the big two just to kind of, get it focused in there and stuff, right? But for the last couple of years, it's all been about like stop looking forward. Let's go back, dissecting, retcon, just not really looking back on things and stuff. Yet, here we are today, and with my personal pull list is that we've gone back to Miracle Man, at Marvel, putting those out, getting newer stories from them. We have the rise of the facsimile editions, which, strangely enough, some of these do go for money on eBay, which blows my mind. Like the first appearance of Moon Knight, that was the big one. So they come back out, and I went ahead and got Batman Year One in the facsimile editions. Just because I was there. We have people collecting older books like the Moorcock Library. And then we have people going back always going back to the JSA and back to things like Jeff Johns with his Stargirl, going back to the late 90s, 99 on forward and stuff. And then, of course, we have like whole magazines dedicated to like the past and stuff. And just to kind of put this on top of why this popped in my mind, but I had a friend on my Facebook put out there, is there anywhere for current comic news? There's just not a lot going on. So do you think there is something to all this stuff looking back after what they've been doing for years? So you think it's a reflection of things not working today and they're still trying to serve an audience? Do you think there's a reason is what I'm trying to get at here?
I blame movies.
Huh?
I blame movies.
You blame the movies?
Yeah. The Marvel movies ruin everything.
Okay. All right.
If you look at all of the comic book magazines in the 90s,
yeah,
they always had a page about, oh, they're going to do a movie about this comic, and we were all anxious about it. We always wanted to see a movie. And whenever there was a comic book movie, even if it sucked like steel,
okay,
we liked the idea that they just made it. But now it's become commonplace, and the comic news landscape shifted from covering the comics that could be adapted into movies into covering the movies, and then they went after the everything else that was attached to it.
I got it. San Diego Comic-Con. Gotcha.
Yeah.
What happened to San Diego Comic-Con? Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
And then they went after the other franchises that had no connection to comics, and they started covering more animation. And okay, a new comic coming out. Don't know. Does anyone care? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why we have all of these events one after each other, and nobody cares. They don't even want to mark. The reaction to lack of comic book coverage turn into trying to make everything relevant and thus making everything irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And in that regard, when diversity in comics and Ethan Van Sciver showed up with crowdfunded comics, it doesn't really matter what you think of them, but it is the appropriate reaction. If you can't go through the proper channels to publish and advertise comics, you have to create them you have to go through a different route, and that's why these comics arrive. The thing is, it's kind of a dead end, because if you don't see it, if you don't buy the comic in the crowd when it's crowdfunded, you will never become interested in it again, because there won't be anyone talking about them to generate buzz.
At some point, I did a video, and I don't know if it was Van Sciver or who it was, but a couple years ago, I did a video of like, is this the real future of comics? Is the crowdfunding and stuff? And I think I overestimated people's interest online, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know they were. I think it's more about the drama farming. Mm-hmm. I think what I kind of think about some of this older stuff that they keep mining and stuff like that and putting out there, it may have absolutely nothing to do with it. I don't know if comic book companies or the people in charge are thinking that far ahead. But the copyright, a lot of this stuff's going to go in public domain. Your Batmans, anything that came out in the 30s, goes out in public domain in about 9, 10, 11 years from now, which blows my mind. And I'm just kind of wondering if they're like getting every scrap they can. DC's going for the movies with James Gunn. I wonder if this is like the last hurrah and cash grab and stuff, Is kind of what I'm wondering. I always was like excited, hoping that I could be old enough to see as a kid. That'd be seeing Superman's 100th year, and stuff like that. I thought that would be cool. And now I'm sitting here realizing that if comics are able to stick around and keep going, we could have all kinds of like anybody and everybody doing like their version of Superman and Batman and stuff coming up. That would be wild. People might fix it up with people.
I think we have with our generation, and maybe the one right after us, and a few, maybe 10, 15 years, Paulo's generation, is that we may have started with, standard superhero books, and we still like those, but we've branched out. And then we began to look at comic strips and all kinds of stuff because we like just the medium as it is. We like pictures with words. We just like them. And we like a variety. I know, Tim, all of us here like a huge variety, including Jared, who's here. We know Jared pretty well. And so I think the publishers see there's a market for this. But I think at one point, it's going to be difficult. Like I discussed earlier, in my opinion, as to what's going to happen with Alan Moore and other people, is there going to be even a market for these type of things? But I think even beyond that, it's a superhero problem. If you're just limited to reading superhero comics, we don't suffer from that problem. Neither the people I think here in the chat. But if your thing is about, these are the superhero comics I like, I still can't forgive what Alan Moore did with Watchmen because of what that influenced. I can't forgive what Frank Miller did either with Daredevil or with Dark Knight and what that did for creators. And I have no clue what Neil Gaiman is doing. Care less about that word. And so
nobody does. If it makes you feel better, nobody knows what he's doing right now.
He's doing, for them, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world. The way I look at it is when you walk into a public library, at least here, when people, although our libraries, we have a lot of libraries, but very few people ever go into them. And when you walk in, they'll show you, like they have a rack of the books that they recommend or the bestsellers or whatever. It would be like going into that rack and depending just on that. And you're saying, I don't see anything of interest. Behind that rack is the entire library. But you will not cross that threshold. Either your imagination or you're limited by something or you just don't want to go there. So you've closed off the rest of the world. And then you begin complaining, books are terrible this year. They're the worst. I went to the library. They had nothing for me. But they don't tell you. They didn't go beyond those two shelves. And I think that's why the superhero readership, they're the ones who are going to be, because comics are still strong. I mean, not just here, but and so non-superhero comics, based on, I just with Jared and others who I know who read them and such, and I read a few. I just don't read them as much because, I'm just cutting back on stuff. And also what goes up, in Europe and other places, people love their comics. It happens not to be men in tights so much.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one that...
Although one thing that we have in Europe that's a problem, there are so many new graphic novels published in France per year that a graphic novel that sells 30,000 copies in 1 year is not making enough money for its creators.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that 30,000 copies puts you in the top 50 to 100.
Wow.
Over here,
there are over 5,000 new graphic novels coming out every year in France, and that's a problem because a lot of things they can't reach consumers.
What I kind of talk about is my 3 hours circle where I put myself at the center of driving to conventions, bookstores, things like that. So luckily it's been accurate. I don't drive as far as I used to do for work for years, right? But you go to the Books A Million, I go to the comic shops that are still open, things like that. It's shrinking what they're selling. And some of these comic book shop owners, I've known them for so long, they just flat out tell me this won't sell. I can't push this. It's just sitting there. So they're going to other things and selling. And then it's manga. that's selling and getting big, and then I'll see people talking about this and see an article here and there about all that stuff. The difference is you can listen to what's online, or you can get out there and see it for yourself. There's people who were into selling the comics at these antique shops and stuff. They're flat out telling me for years they're just getting out, selling everything, getting out of it and stuff like that. I've always held that what the thing about comics that's always going to be safe is that back issue market. And that's what I have been seeing at the bigger shows. Like, I have what I can see with my eyes and the number of people doing it, so that's still out there, but it usually is older people, and it's really good to see a lot of younger people there also and stuff. And my whole point of trying to get to this, and I'm not doing it well, is there's been many times there's been comments from you, Gore. We've discussed about how what kids and the younger audience is into is just not what comics are. That's a good way to bottom line it,
No, I mean, we're one of the last generations that grew up with comics being part of our childhoods, and like many things that shaped us, that we found interest in, and we made ourselves understand how to read comics.
Yeah.
In my case, I was learning English, but I liked the pictures of the comics, but I wanted to understand the comics, so I had to really, pick up on my reading of English. But I wanted to understand them, right? And so there was that, and it was visual entertainment, like the movies were and television was. But without having nothing to force you to do it, I think I commented with you, Tim, there was a Howard Chaykin interview that he did about a year or two ago. And
comic kayfabe, I think.
No, it was with Word Balloon.
Word
I think it was with Word Balloon, although it might have been with the kayfabe guys, but maybe Word Balloon. Where he talked about it, he was surprised comics the superhero comics didn't end with Iron Man. His point was that when the film Iron Man came out in 2008, that for many, that people wanted to see their superheroes on the screen. That didn't basically end superhero comics, because the point is, why read the comic when you can watch the movie? And but the movies continued, people continued to read the comics and such. But he sort of suggested, basically what I'm getting at is eventually the superhero genre, as we know it in comics, is going to go to the side. The comics won't, but maybe the superheroes as we know them might. But his point was, if you can have all these movies now, and Paulo talked about the Marvel films, is that my friend, my good friends, they own a comic shop, and I'll probably go see them this afternoon. And they have kids. The kids will not read the comics. They have no interest in them, but they like the movies to death.
Yeah.
They won't even read manga. They won't, and so that's just something that just has no value to them, even though they grew up with their parents reading comics, having them all over the house. This doesn't appeal to them at all. And that's why these subsequent generations, I think what's going to happen, at least with the superhero comics, I don't know. The graphic novels will continue for the comic medium. But as we know, Tim, who reads Legion of Superheroes? Who reads the back issues of Legion? Nobody. Who reads the old issues of Teen Titans? That much nobody reads.
Yeah.
I mean, by nobody, no one really substantial to keep those things,
right,
talking about it, right? And eventually people talk about the John Byrne X-Men, but the new generation have gone back to actually try to read Chris Claremont and Burns.
Some of the stuff you said I've seen with my own eyes in this house. Well, with my biological son, he read maybe 5 comic books his entire life, and they were Lin Win, Blue Beetle, Paris Collins from the 80s. I've kept them, but he read something like 5 Harry Potter books in less than a month, like 3 weekends. Okay,
there you go.
That blew my mind. Yeah,
there you go.
And then in this house, I went back to the BattleTech Comico Macross series. Offered him up, bought him, and the stepkid nothing. Did not want to read him after it looked like he was excited a little bit because he found 2 issues I had. You're right. There's absolutely no interest there at all. Not even a glimmer of curiosity. It's the lack of curiosity that blows my mind. You know what I mean? can't I can't process that, and that's a me issue, not a them issue.
Fair enough.
Sure, but your biological son is in his 20s now, right?
Yeah, 25, 26. Yeah.
Right, and your stepkid is still a teenager. So you kind of have a difference between the late stage millennials and the new Generation Z, who already had smartphones at age 10, and it's
Yeah.
1 second, 1 second, 1 second, 1 second.
Yeah, this is why I say it's a me issue, not a them issue. I'm observing. I'm trying to, I'm a people watcher. I don't
Sure.
talk this much in real life. I'm a people watcher. I observe people. I wish I knew that
understand, but-
sociology could have been a career. I probably would have been pretty good at that. You know what I mean?
But they need to be directed. We just have no idea how to direct them. And I never had to be directed to reading. It's something that I took to at quite a young age, and the problem was me asking for more books, and they weren't even fiction. You gave me a world atlas, and I would be going over the page on Malawi for the rest of the day. So I understand that if kids are not used to reading, they do have to be directed. The trick that nobody else seems to quite get it's something that has puzzled generations of parents is how do I get my kid to read?
Well, I'm not going to try to have parent hour here and stuff, but they don't want to hear from it. They don't want to hear advice, and these are observations. Good, maybe right or wrong. This is observations, and they don't even want. A lot of them, a majority of them, do not even want to drive. It's real interesting. Like I said, I'm kind of fascinated with it. Like, wow. And I'm afraid there's going to be a situation where we'll just have to toss them out there in life and let the sink or swim idea happen. I think, maybe try to be a little bit of a safety net, but it's a very different generation out there to where if you find people who, if you find parts of the generation who do have that drive and things like that, they really need to be embraced and supported because it's becoming a rarity, I'm trying to think what the word ambition, if they have ambition and focus.
I may even have to be more knowledgeable about manga to properly direct new kids to manga, because at least there's some interest there.
I don't know.
Akira Toriyama died on Thursday, and I mentioned this on Jared's show. Dragon Ball is probably the fault why I show zero interest in starting to read something Japanese. Because the kids in my high school, they insisted on telling everyone else around them what happened in the Dragon Ball episode from yesterday.
Yeah. I've heard a lot about Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, my wife refers to them as Dragon Balls, and I'm like, too soon, baby, too soon.
But I would watch an episode. What is this? Which is kind of funny, because for a guy who got into American comics through superheroes and throughout the teenage years, I've shown very little interest in moving beyond superheroes when it comes to American comics, because I would read European comics, but they were different. You'd think that I would be all in on shonen, but I'm not.
Right. Well, I mean, I've talked about what I grew up on. It's the superheroes grabbed me. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, I watched when I grew up and was around, I've said it before, Super Friends, the Hulk TV show, Wonder Woman, discovering Battle of the Planets on Saturday mornings, syndication, Johnny Quest, The Adventures of Superman from the 50 on antennas and things like that. There's things up there. So, and then reading adult things like heavy metal magazine stuff when I was 6, 7, 5 years old and stuff, right? So I've always enjoyed the variety of the genre, even though I know the superhero stuff got me, because a lot of that stuff was easily available and cheaper. And then the adult stuff was like Conan grabbed me and things like that. But there was always there's always that risk that was fun in the treasure hunt, the hunt of finding something new to experience. Like I said, I picked up Elementals, an alternative comic book, and it had that taboo feeling of like, maybe I shouldn't be, it was exciting because this is an alternative comic. There's going to be things you don't see in other comics. There was an excitement about it. Let me do these comments here. Again, this actually ties into what I was talking about seeing things from the past pop up. There's a podcast, YouTube channel, Instagram account, and I've seen other people try to do it before, but they're going all in where people are taking Wizard magazines and they're going issue by issue, and they're actually bringing in people who worked at Wizard to talk about the specific issues they were doing back then. I wish I knew the name of the channel off the top of my head, but I can't remember. But anyway, he's saying when CBG went from a weekly comic book newspaper to a monthly Wizard-like magazine, that was the end of the comic book news for me. Many people really have fond memories of Comic Book Buyer's Guide. Like, that was the Bible, the way they act and stuff. Jared Osborne, my fellow art teachers, and I often joke there are more art students who want to make comics than want to read them. I can agree with that. What I've run across doing symposiums.
One thing that Jared was complaining about. One thing that Jared was complaining about for the artists that want to make. Okay, the work for collages when it's getting really difficult because there are no magazines for them to cut through.
When I do symposiums for some kids that are turning 18 and going into the real world, I have to talk about our services where I work and stuff. They all want to be video game designers. That seems to be
many of my friends' kids too. That's all they want to do, and YouTubers. They want to be YouTubers.
Okay, I haven't run across any influencers yet that want to be influencers, which I'm very glad. The best magnet slogan said, "Teenagers, move out and live your life while you still know everything." All right, that might be the title of this podcast, this live show. I've got to rename this. So we won't be talking about Stan Lee of Japan. Okay.
That's not fair because it's not the same thing. You are supposed to go through the studio system before you head out on your own in Japan. There's no other way but you do learn the ropes, and then you already have a foot in the door to get your own stuff published.
If you guys don't mind, I'm going to acknowledge this comment because I'm going to wipe it out of the title because I pulled this stuff out. There's a thing, Gray Man, I know what you're talking about here, but there's a thing going on where I've got to do some research. I woke up to a video alert to a channel I'm not even on. And if you have there's supposed to be a list somewhere online I got to look up. But if you have Warner Brothers DVDs made between 2005 and 2009, they cheaped out on them and they may be rotten with DVD rot. And that includes all of this glorious stuff that I have. My Batman animated series, my Batman Beyond, the Timverse, my Wonder Woman season sets. And this is the one that's going to hurt if this is true. But these are the original DVD releases of Batman the Animated Series that I've had since they came out in the 2000s. These may all be rotten. Apparently, Warner Brothers classic movies, anything, from what I can gather, there was supposedly a factory in Philadelphia that cheaped out by 4 cents per DVD, and they all may be rotten and skipped. They're finding more and more of these. And apparently this has been common knowledge for 2 years, but it's hitting now. So I'm going to wipe that out of the comments, out of the title, if anybody is here live and seeing that. So I'm covered. I didn't give false, I didn't bait you in with a bad title there. Anyway, it's just so sad that the purest form of Batman, to me, the best Batman, what Batman is, may be rotten now. That hurts, man. Why would you pay $35.99 for all 40 episodes of Extreme Ghostbusters? I'm proud to say I never did. So.
I've never seen an episode of Extreme Ghostbusters.
I never know either. And I don't mind talking about it because, it blows my mind to go back and see some of those 80s cartoons. And I was a Saturday morning guy, but I didn't watch everything. But it blows my mind to find out people like J. Michael Straczynski and Bruce Timm are all over some of those cartoons on Saturday mornings. I was like, wow, found that out in retrospect.
Did not know that. I don't watch many.
No, Straczynski, from He-Man to Captain Power to the final seasons of Murder, She Wrote.
He was also story editor on the 80s Twilight Zone that I love. I love that show when it was on. Twilight Zone's probably my favorite episode. I don't know. I go back and forth between X-Files, Twilight Zone, some of these shows. But J. Michael Straczynski did a comic book about 10 years ago through Dynamite or Boom of Twilight Zone, and people wondered how he was able to write such great issues. He was the story editor of the 80s Twilight Zone. Those are probably leftover scripts. Straczynski throws out nothing. He will reuse it in whatever,
I didn't know anything about him because I just know him from Babylon 5.
Yeah.
you know, and it's comic work. But I like Babylon 5.
Yeah.
But I didn't know he worked on Murder, She Wrote, on The Twilight Zone. That's
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
good. That's the versatility of those writers. It reminds me of an interview that I saw a long time ago. I mean, literally, because I used to watch 60 Minutes a lot, and I remember they were interviewing. This must have been in the late 90s, I think. It must have been then. And they were interviewing the writer of MASH, the TV show. Is that Gelb? Larry Gelb? Is that who it is? They were interviewing him and all these older, well, back then, older writers.
Right, right.
And the question was, they were having trouble finding jobs in television. And they were having trouble finding jobs on the news shows. And they were thinking maybe because, maybe they were not as relevant anymore. And so, but they were talking about how, they obviously have a lot to add to in their storytelling. But I want to say, when Law and Order was on in the 90s, the peak of Law and Order, the TV show, which it's one of my favorite TV shows. All the other Criminal Intent I have no use for. But I rewatched all those old Law and Order episodes. One thing that I think that's how that came up. It was shows like Law and Order. They were hiring these older writers. And they had young writers too. Young writers who, like when these guys were young, and men and women were young, they had something in them, right? And that's why they hired them. But they had something to add in the storytelling. But they were already seeing a sign that maybe they were not as valuable as some of these younger creators. But I think they added a lot of value into Law and Order. And I think Homicide was one of the other shows they were hiring people for at the time. Pretty well-regarded shows at this point. This is before The Sopranos, before The Wire, and shows that people, have in high regard as well. But they were hiring people like them.
Well, funny you brought up Law and Order because somebody ought to be out there. Jerry Conway, I think, is the guy that was the story editor on Law and Order.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
For those original? The original, he started in the late 80s, and it went to the 90s.
I don't know how long he was on it, but he was on forever. Now, here's the deal. Law and Order, I'm proud to say, I was there from day one. I've seen all the Law and Orders. I have seen all the Criminal Intent. I've seen all of SVU up until Stabler left, and after that, it's most of them.
I haven't seen any of those.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to give people a disclaimer.
The thing about Criminal Intent, unlike the Law and Order, is a procedural. SVU is a soap opera. Mm-hmm. Criminal Intent is an anthology, always with the same character, and that character is Vincent D'Onofrio.
Yeah. He's supposed to be their version of like a Sherlock Holmes detective, but they never, schizophrenic, and they got some things. But I want to give people a disclaimer here a little bit, because I actually used to put up with my phone. I would record like little 30-second clips of Law and Order. Stabler hates comic book people. There is an actual episode of SVU where they get a call. He's at his desk, and they're at the comic book shop, and he looks across the desk, pretty much at the camera, and he's like, comic book store, comic book readers. Damn it. He hates them. It really hurt me. It hurt me when he did that. But yeah, Gary Conway. Now, this is the thing that I've talked about before, just get this out there, but it blows my mind how almost anything I've always liked outside of comics, I found out later it had ties to comic books. The movies I grew up on, Mike Plug probably did the storyboards for him. Jim Steranko probably did the storyboards for him. Jack Kirby probably did some character designs on like some of the cartoons I love, Centurions and things like that. I would find this stuff all out later in life and looking back like, my God, it was always there. And I tell you what, when I was able to really understand the new gods that I was reading and stuff, you talk about looking at Star Wars and Masters of the Universe, all in He-Man, all in a different light. Jack Kirby influenced all of that stuff. And I come to find out that George Lucas was a part owner of a comic book shop in the mid 70s. And so he was a comic book guy. So this stuff, from Ralph Bakshi's Wizards and his Lord of the Rings, and then everything that came out after that.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind when I was about 17, 18. I'm reading Comic Spectacular and stuff, and reading these interviews or whatever was out back then, and looking back on it, like, oh my God, they're all over this stuff,
Well, maybe Gary Conway should use this as a defense whenever he goes to a con and people are still pissed off he killed off Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
And say, hey, but do you watch Law and Order? Oh, I love that show. Well, I helped on that show. Let's move away from me killing off Gwen Stacy.
Yeah, and then it blows my mind when you have people like J. Michael Straczynski and Alan Moore admits and stuff, and we're back to Philip Jose Farmer with the Walden Newton stuff. This stuff comes out like Rising Stars, and at one point his Rising Stars, which was heavily influenced by the Walden Newton theory, in some other book, I can't remember. But anyway, it blows my mind that people are trying to say that was the book that was going to knock Watchmen down. There's a whole article in Wizard where they're putting them side by side, and they're trying to say that J. Michael Straczynski's his Rising Stars is the new Watchmen. Watchmen has finally been took down a peg. We see where that went, Yeah.
It could have happened. There were several things that went against it. The market when the delays happened on Rising Stars. It was at a time that the industry was not kind to delays, because there was just not enough money to invest for comic star owners to invest on future product that would not move. It was at that time that the comic shops stopped stocking unsold issues. They didn't even bother having stuff for the back issue bins. If you had 10 pre-orders, you'd order 12 comics, because you'd have 10, so then you'd put the other 2. Okay, maybe these 2 I can sell off the rack, but that was it. So it was never, the market was not there to help Midnight Nation, Rising Stars. If he had finished it on time, there would be a nice collection of graphic novels that it could have exploited. But Top Cow was also not big on reprints at the time, which would have prevented. Here's the thing: Watchmen was the first comic that sold well as a trade paperback. In fact, it was a shot in the dark for DC, because nobody had ever done it before. At least not in the direct market, and not regular comic book stores. There were compilations of newspaper strips, of course, especially stuff like Garfield or Doonesbury. Those would be easy to collect, and you'd go to the bookstore and you'd buy one. The superhero stuff was not something that you'd collect. The fact that Watchmen was available right off the bat as a trade paperback collection and stayed that way was unique, in both in the way that it was done and in the way that it was successful. And Rising Stars did not do either of those. It was never going to be a success, because it will not take advantage of what the market could do for it in the long run.
Gotcha. Gore, before I do an explanation, how are you familiar with Midnight Nation, Rising Stars, any of these books?
No, just I know about them, but I haven't read them.
Real quick, Midnight Nation is the idea of people disappearing into like a dimension that you can still see the real world, but it's like the homeless and the people that are ignored. And at the same time, if you're there for too long, you kind of turn into this demon thing. It's like an everyman's journey. It's 12 issues of a man disappearing, being surrounded by the demons and stuff, and trying not to turn into one of them. And they're walking across the country. J. Michael Straczynski recycled stories. He tried doing the Superman walking across America about 10 or 11 years later or something. Rising Stars is the idea that this meteor, I think it was a meteor, Paulo, a meteor came across. He used this in his Squadron Supreme also, this origin, but it comes from the Walt Newton stuff. A meteor went by, or maybe it was, I don't know, one of them he did a spaceship, but it dropped radiated like seeds and contaminants. And we'll say something like 100 people in this town ended up having kids who had superpowers. And each one of them died, that power was dispersed to the 99. If another one to the 98, and the more they died, the more powerful. And it came down to 2 people. It's very Highlander like, I thought, a little bit. And it got in there because there were some cool concepts. It kind of showed how the military came in, kept these kids together. One kid went full Batman, or tried to. They showed him as the 12-year-old kid making a costume and hiding out in trees and posing like Batman, like he's on patrol. You know, and some other people were down to earth and went out and had real lives. He tried to keep it in the real world. But I didn't think it was going, and I want to be devil's advocate. I'm going to be on the other side of this. I didn't feel like it was Watchmen like, because J. Michael Krasinski didn't really have an original concept per se. The art on it, you just cannot compare the artist on it, who was full blown image, this really bad art, compared to Dave Gibbons. And then, like, again, he got Rich Buckler on there towards the end. And I think they went 24 or 25 issues, but good God, it took forever for it to come out, which I think killed the momentum also. But I just never thought it was, I thought it was sophisticated, and it was very Game of Thrones like before Game of Thrones. You know, some stuff did happen, but I just felt like he was sort of reacting to things like Miracle Man and Kingdom Come and Squadron Supreme. I felt like it was heavily influenced, and he just sort of took a whole bunch of stories and made this very nice story out of them. If that makes
When did
sense.
this come out to?
90s.
Late 90s, mid 90s?
98 or 99. It started around 98 or 99. And then the after issue 18, Straczynski got busy with something, and I think it was at the time that they were cutting budget on Babylon 5, which is why it stopped, and he couldn't finish Babylon 5 the way he wanted. But then it got interrupted, and it was supposed to end on 23 or 24, but it went one issue more. But then there were no trade paperbacks because Top Cow wasn't DC, and it wouldn't keep people interested in the series. Midnight Nation is 12 issues, which is easier to collect. And then there was another one, which was then it had much interest, but it was a fun read. It was Kin. It was about a Neanderthal. Turns out that the Neanderthals were hyper intelligent, and they created a secret society that was hyper technological. And sometimes you'd catch one of them outside, and they were big, and people thought they were Bigfoot. But
I'm gonna have to track that one down. I don't know if I have that or not.
Yeah.
I have the right.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. I would love for somebody to go. The artwork was so bad on Rising Stars that there's two characters, and they were the important characters. You couldn't tell them apart. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, this was like a poor man's Mark Hempel. You know what I mean? Like, with, you know, I don't know what he was doing. So when I think it was Rich Buckler, I hope I'm remembering, when Rich Buckler came back, when Straczynski came back to finish it, night and day, just so good.
I wonder, though.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this came out almost 15 years after Watchmen, and I think I think we all agree here. What Watchmen did was Watchmen, Dark Knight, and Swamp Thing by Moore, and Daredevil by Miller, as it brought in just an audience maybe who didn't read the superhero comics, but most importantly, introduced the superhero comics, which the general public read, into, you can do this in a comic, and I like it. Of course, some people didn't like it, and I wonder, though, by the time these books came out, because by that point you already had, if you have people who are just reading these, we like these kinds of per se superhero comics for the most part, right? You get Vertigo by this point. Then you have the people already reading Vertigo-like comics for the most part.
Yeah.
And those things that are related, not just with Sandman, but all the kind of Hellblazer and all this other stuff. So by the time you get to Straczynski's book, as good as it may have been, is maybe the reason it could not be another Watchmen is that what Watchmen and these other comics did, for the mainstream did, I think it would have had to do something new for that generation, that era of comics, which something that you already had an audience which was already embracing this sort of ideas and thinking, this is likely pretty good, kind of new, but we kind of like this. Versus when Watchmen came out, like, what the hell am I reading? Swamp Thing, what the heck is this? How it changed things. Or even Warrior Magazine a few years later with V for Vendetta and Marvel Man, I think. So maybe, I don't know. I mean, without having read these books, I wonder maybe this is the reason maybe Of course, to make a claim like that, when people say that, this is the new Stanley Kubrick,
Yeah.
This is the new Nolan, this is the new. Okay, be careful how you say these things. Are you just speaking hyperbole? And the new Watchmen. What do you gotta be careful with statements like that.
My theory is at the time, and with me, I look at the big picture. I always try not to get too crazy with this and stuff, but I started suspecting that there were stunts going on with Wizard working with the comic book companies. Okay, at some point, it went from being journalistic and a fan of the comics, and we're doing interviews, because what happened was they had a sketchbook of Earth X come out, where they said they were just like, "Hey, Alex Ross, what would you do if you did, your Kingdom Come at Marvel? What would it be?" They acted like they just asked him to do this on the fly, and he put in so much work and a full-blown plot and explanations on the little sketchbook insert that came with it that, lo and behold, all of a sudden it's happening at Marvel. You don't put that much work into something if it hasn't already been pitched and approved and they're playing the game. That's what it felt like to me. Okay. So what is a better way to get to get somebody noticed that you like when they're doing, I mean, the book is well written. Rising Stars is well written. I recommend reading it if you get past the art. I think you just need to know what you're getting into it. So what better way than to come out and say something controversial like, "Hey, this is going to take down Watchmen." I think it was a stunt, and they did an article and had somebody come in and draw all the characters facing each other. If I remember, now I want to go dig through my wizards and find it and stuff. I think it was a stunt to try to get people talking, because the internet was also just starting. I think at some point Wizards sort of started working with Marvel and these companies a little bit on promotion. So yeah,
I don't find anything wrong with that. And the other day was watching a cartoonist kayfabe video, and they've been going through all of the Wizards starting from issue number 1, and they're already up to 60 something. And one thing they noticed is that Top Cow was highly promoted, considering how irrelevant they became historically. That they were probably more promoted than other companies, but I don't find that a problem. Wizard was not the Comics Journal. The Comics Journal positioned itself as literary minded, which meant that they had to explain their reasoning for saying some things about a comic or not. Yeah. Wizard kind of functioned as a extended catalog. It was a promotion tool.
I have nothing bad to say about. I have nothing bad to say about Wizard, whatever they were doing, behind the scenes. Wizard brought me a lot of joy, and I still have those books and a lot of memories. And there's a lot of articles you can read that you won't find online and stuff, Right. So yeah, whatever they were doing, I'm not like down them. I think it was just an observation.
Let's just say that whatever is intelligent, whatever is important and intelligent in Wizard only exists because they had that promotion angle that could be used to pay the bills.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, no problem with it. Would you guys be offended if we went ahead and ended this? I'm running out of stamina, and I think I need to eat. I didn't.
No worries, Tim.
I'm so glad you guys came on. I appreciate it. Tell everybody where you can be found.
On Wednesday nights, I show up at 7 p.m. Or is it 8? 2, 25 at 8 p.m. Eastern on Graphic Man's channel for the 4-color fossils, where everybody remembers what it was like to be young, and I show people covers of French comics that they have never heard of. And on Fridays at 6, I am on Jared Osborne's channel for the Cavern of Chaos, where we talk random stuff about comics from all over the planet. But mostly stories about Jared's stationery.
Yeah, Jared's not wrong, guys. I don't know. I'm getting old. I turned 51 last week. Apparently, I need to eat. I don't know what's going on.
No, you need to eat.
And thank you, John C. For the
thank you everyone for being here. I
These
enjoyed
are
it.
great guys, very knowledgeable. Gore, same with you. Where would you like people to find you? You have your regular channel,
I
your
have a regular channel, and I started a booktube channel not long ago called Libro Paradiso, where I discuss books and like this channel, I make videos about stuff that I'm interested in. Whenever I'm interested, I just make them. And at this point, I'm not sure what I want to do. Could make something today, or maybe take a month. I have no idea. But one thing about is stuff that I just like and why I like it. And so it's this channel and also Libro Paradiso. So, but I enjoyed meeting you, Paulo, finally, formally. And
Finally.
Tim, that was good talking to you, Tim. Always.
Yeah, and we'll go off there. Don't run off, So yeah. All right, later, guys. Everybody be excellent to each other.
Adios, everyone.
Bye.
Best to you from Texas.
Texas, Portugal, and Virginia. I love it.